Okay, the we're having trouble with we're trying to get like solar panels put on the house or whatever, and apparently the guy had to shut off the power. I was really hoping that wouldn't happen, but we are back. Please give me a shout out if you're still with me. I would completely understand if you're not, but we are back on. I expect no other issues, but today just does not seem like my day. We had the mic issue earlier. We had the power go out. What else will stop me from going over this debate? Nothing. I will not be deterred. The universe cannot prevent me from talking about Aron Ra and Kent Hovind, no matter how much it wishes to save you from this agony. But let's get back into it.
That are relevant to this subject some years ago. Back in 2012, I put some of
Let's
the
back it up a bit just to make
I
sure we
didn't
didn't miss
think it was
much.
impossible to find because I do class. Back in 2012, I put something called Offerings to the Atheist Dictionary
Okay,
because
because we're
these are
talking about
words
his
that are
definition of
comically, or actually comically is correct, that are
of
comically
religion.
misrepresented whenever you're arguing with creationists. The definition of religion that I came up with by examining all the different things that are universally accepted as religion by both their adherents and their critics
I
are
think we saw this,
a
but I'll just let it
doctrine
play.
of ritual traditions, ceremonies, mythology, and associated dogma of a faith based belief system which posits a posthumous promise that some element of self, be it a soul or consciousness or memories, etc., may in some sense continue beyond the death of a physical being. Now, this applies to every religion that is universally accepted as a religion and doesn't, and evolution, however, meets exactly none of these criteria. So I want to hear what you define as a religion and how we can
Well,
distinguish things that are not religion from things that are.
okay, I would like to ask Kyle or one of the moderators to kind of keep time here because
All
Aaron
right,
keeps.
this is where it's starting to come up already. He wants them to keep time, and I'll let him finish the thing. But this is the issue of maybe not the issue, but this is the distinction between a discussion and debate coming up for the first time.
Over talking me and monopolizing the conversation. This is supposed to be a discussion. I would like equal time. Okay.
So, I don't know. I don't know how many discussions Kent has had with peers. I imagine he's often in circumstances where the people around him are his minions, as I would call them. But no discussions don't. Nobody has a stopwatch making sure everyone talks for the same amount of time. You talk however it comes up, and some more heated discussions might have more interruptions. A debate would be a situation in which you would have protected time in which you can't be interrupted or challenged, and something that has been this is something that can be good. In a good faith discussion, it's good to let people really lay out all of their ideas in a way where they can fully expound upon them without being interrupted before they can finish the idea. Because sometimes something might sound contentious until I talk for 3 or 4 sentences and explain where I'm coming from. However, bad faith actors have either figured out or have always done this, I'm not exactly sure, have realized that this is a very useful tool for a lot of really bad tactics, things like a Gish Gallop. We'll add that to the concepts. And I'll fill these in at some point. I just don't feel like it right this second. Can't spell at the moment, apparently. Gish Gallop, actually named from a guy for a guy. There was a guy known for doing this. Last name was Gish. Uh, named for. Let me see if I can find who it's named for. But it basically. I don't care enough to look into it. Basically, where they just lay out a bunch of positions and one after another, so you can't really respond to all of them in a meaningful way. In a competitive debate, the solution to this is that everything is laid out in a structured fashion where it's also expected that the other person will go just down the arguments and explain why each of them is wrong. Now, you can still leverage your time in this way if you just lay out 400 bad arguments. I'm not going to be able to respond to them all in time, and this is part of the problem because people like Kent can lie more times in the sentence than there are words in the sentence, or even lie 4 times in a sentence. Right? That might sound like that's less hyperbolic, certainly, though I've seen Kent do the former. And you can't in the same amount of time debunk all of it. But this isn't a debate. You don't have protected time. This is a discussion. We're talking, and I think this is one of the things that the non sequiturs show. That's where we're watching it on. I know it's getting cut off because of how I modified the screen. But that's one of the things that I think the organizers did well as far as responsible platforming. They did not present a debate wherein Kent could speak unchallenged for a length of time. It's sent as a discussion. If you get interrupted, that's just how the discussions go sometimes. And maybe if it gets excessive, we'll call it out. But what excessive is has to be in relation to what's being discussed. If you keep getting interrupted because you want to talk about something off topic, and I mean really off topic, like to make it very clear, if Kent kept trying to talk about his favorite flavor of ice cream and Aaron kept interrupting him, I don't think anyone would find that weird, right? So there's a lot more leeway in what's acceptable and what's not. But he's going to be complaining about this a lot, to the point where he like one of his followers went back over and counted the interruptions and timed the different amounts of time that they were speaking. And it was like, if you trust that person's findings, I think it was like 2-1 Aaron to Kent. But sometimes discussions are like that, and with you, it's necessary. And I don't really feel bad for him, but this is where it's like, in like as far as what's happening here, they are arguing, which is what happens in the debate, right? And it feels the same thing, but the distinction is about what's acceptable.
Fair enough. Okay. He's asked you a question. We're going to give you ample time to respond to his question with a direct answer for a direct question.
And notice, this is one of those, like, it's kind of a biased it's a biased moderator, but I mean, when you're talking with someone like this, I don't know how you. I don't think an unbiased moderator is appropriate, right? If you have an unbiased moderator between, for example, like what we would call a traditional conservative and a Nazi, I don't want an unbiased commentator. I want someone who's against the Nazi, for a lot of reasons, including getting a productive discussion. But he made very clear, it's like, well, yeah, he asked you a question. If you want to give a direct answer, he's not saying you can just talk about whatever and that will be protected by us, the moderators. In as much as Kent is willing to engage in good faith, which he's not, the moderators should be there to protect him. A surprisingly good moderator, and maybe we'll watch a debate on that channel for seeing what good moderation looks like, is a guy called Big Papa Fascist. Of all people, I did not expect it. The first time I saw him moderate, I couldn't believe how good a moderator he was. And maybe we'll watch one of those debates so we can see what good moderation looks like, even from someone who you would expect to be biased.
I have up on screen the definition from Random House Webster's College Dictionary, year 2000, page 1116. Religion, a set of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe. That is what fits your religion of evolutionism.
Let's check that, because I doubt that it's so. I doubt it's so thoroughly in Kent's favor in that definition. No. Am I not going to be able to find... Okay, let me see if I can find just the dictionary and we can look it up from there. If it might not be an online resource. It might be something like if you have the book or something. It seems that there's not an online resource for it, but I just remembered I have directly to hand. Let's see if you can see. I'm not sure if you can see this. An unabridged Webster's unabridged dictionary. Oh, that's right. I also mirrored the image, so it's not gonna be able to see it. Let's see. Let's do our own research, right? They always say do your own research. Let's see if I can find religion in here and see what it says. Give me just a moment. This is very off topic, but I think it's fun. Isn't it fun to go on this little search? Even though it's, as I say, completely off topic or not super relevant. All right, religion, religiosity. Where'd it go? Religion. It's actually the definition as listed here is exactly what he's saying, but I don't think he finishes it. So, a set of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe, especially when considered as the creation of a superhuman agency or agencies, usually involving devotional and ritual observances, and often containing a moral code of or moral code governing the conduct of human affairs. So he cuts it off way at the beginning there, only at the part that benefits him. This is why like it can be useful to do this like very stupid fact finding, because even what he said, I was like, oh, he's probably just making that up. No. It does say those words, but then it says more words after that, and he just pretends they're
It
not.
doesn't.
It does.
Hold
It's
on,
exactly
No,
it.
it doesn't, because evolution has nothing to do with the cause of the universe, nor certainly not the purpose of it.
This is again
Doesn't
where
it?
the conflations that Kent does serve his purposes, right? He says that evolution includes Big Bang cosmology so that he can say, oh, look, it's a religion because it's concerned with the nature and origin of the universe. This is, again, I don't think he believes they're the same thing, but it's very useful to him to say they're the same thing.
Have to do with the nature of the universe, how things work.
How things work, yes.
Okay, well then,
And now we're getting a little bit of a Mott and Bailey. Does it have to do with the nature of how the universe, how things work? At that point, you could say that, you know, causality is a religion, or time or gravity are all religions. But like while Kant might say he thinks they are to win an argument, obviously no one believes that. What we mean by religion is very different than this, and in as much as the definition does captures things that are outside of that, the definition has failed. Right? This is a little bit of the accuracy of a definition that we're talking about. Like, it doesn't help us at all. We talked about this with the T-jump and Vosh discussion. It doesn't help us at all to say, yeah, sure, anything that has to do with how the universe works is a religion. Instead, it is helpful to say something like what Aaron said. That definition does describe what we mean by religion in a pretty useful way.
then you
But
have a
not
religion.
with the universe.
Okay. You believe that dogs, you believe that whales, I think it was elephants and pine trees are related. No
They're
one's ever
both
seen
eukaryotes, are they not?
no one's ever seen an elephant produce any
And I like this. Like, it's a good way of challenging it. Make Kent agree to something that would demonstrate he believes the same thing. Right? Ask, are they both eukaryotes?
anything but an
What's
elephant.
They are both eukaryotes, are they not?
It doesn't
If I
matter.
remember
They're
correctly,
both
Why
living.
does it
just
not matter?
multicellular.
They're both above ground.
life
They
form.
both
Yes, and
ingest
but
gases.
they're both eukaryotes, correct?
It doesn't matter. You're missing
It
the
certainly
point.
does matter.
Of
But
course
the
he doesn't
question
wanna
is not
answer it,
whether it matters. The question is whether or not they are eukaryotes.
You have to wonder why he doesn't want to
You're
answer
missing the point
such a
completely.
No. You
such
are
a
missing the point.
forward question.
Are they both
yes, you can answer
eukaryotes,
very
yes
quickly.
or no?
He could
That's
even
fine.
say yes, and it doesn't matter because, but he doesn't want to answer. And a lot of times when people realize that their position is untenable, they won't answer very simple yes/no questions.
As far as I know, they are. That does.
Yeah.
So does
Have
that
you ever
prove
seen
they're
a
related?
eukaryote give
Now
birth
he's
to a
admitted to it.
non-eukaryote?
Does that prove they're related?
Within the
Well, in a
within
way,
the,
yes.
the phylogeny, yes, it does.
See, this is why I mentioned phylogeny at the beginning, because if you just say, oh, they're both eukaryotes and they're related, but you look at, the kingdom, phylum, order style of taxonomy, it might not seem relevant why those are related. But when we go back to phylogeny, I'm actually just going to keep that open because we might come back to it a few times. But when you look at phylogeny, as soon as this thing loads, hello? I know there's an image here. Well, as soon as that loads, here we are. But when you look at phylogeny, then you would see why that's relevant. They're both eukaryotes. That means that's actually, conveniently enough, the grouping on the left here, which means you can see the common ancestry. That yes, that must mean necessarily, if they're in the same category, they're in that category because they came from a common ancestor that is the starting point of all eukaryotes. There's something very interesting I heard once. I think it was it was either Richard Dawkins or Lawrence Krauss was talking about it. It was a very interesting concept that at some point in the future, the human person that you yourself are, not like you as a concept, but you who will either be the ancestor to all living humans or to none of them, which is really interesting, right? Like these timescales are hard to wrap your head around, but yeah, it kind of does work that way. This is why we talk about things like Genghis Khan is the ancestor of something like a third of humans, or something ridiculous like that, in part because he had many children, but also because on a long enough time period, those children have children and have children, and like eventually it gets to the point where there are so many people that have entered into the mix, as it were, that all people, or in Genghis Khan's case, like a huge number of people, are related to the same one individual. And it's the same with the species, right? We are all related to our shared common ancestor, and that to a shared common ancestor with another being, and all back to, I don't know how many, but probably a very small number of living creatures.
Okay, now, since you keep talking about phylogeny and said this is your area of expertise, I would like to just ask you. You're on a show called the Non Sequitur, which I think is classic. A non sequitur is a conclusion or statement that does not logically follow from the previous argument or statement.
And grandstanding.
I think we can give examples of elephants producing elephants and pine trees producing pine trees. It does not logically follow that they are related.
Why would that not logically?
But of course, well, that's true, right? Like, I've never seen. It's like we always see elephants produce elephants and pine trees produce pine trees. Therefore, they're related. Would be a non sequitur, but that's not the line of reasoning. But he's obviously never going to charitably or accurately reprise his opponent's position, because he's actively being dishonest. This is all for show, just for the exposure and looking like he has defeated another evolutionist in the marketplace of ideas. He's only here for the show, and that's really important to remember. So, like, obviously he's never going to be honest about what Aaron's position is, which is not that elephants produce elephants and pine trees produce pine trees, therefore they're related. He would never even think to say something that ridiculous.
Follow. I need to explain to you that you've been repeating incorrectly for years. I've been listening to you get this wrong for 20 years, and I'm delighted that maybe I'm the first person out of all the people you talk to. It can't be that I'm the first person to address this, but I keep hearing you repeat this error. So let me address that now.
It is not an error.
So he doesn't even know what Aaron is about to say is an error, but he's like, nope, it's not an error. It's impossible, I'm wrong. Which, for the positions he takes, obviously, it's like going to say something like that. But I do like that Aaron's pointing out, like, hey, I can't be the first person to have told you this. Point out that he's not being honest.
It is
the
not
law
an
of
error.
monophyly.
You are in error. You are in error, and I'm here to fix it.
You have no idea what I'm even going to say. And when I'm done saying it, you still won't have any idea what I said.
I remember distinctly saying
you have no idea what you're saying. I will help you here.
Witness.
Religion is a belief,
pretend.
and you have
Don't pretend.
You have
I know that
a belief.
you made a life out of pretending, but that's not what we're going to do.
I'm
addressing your error.
Oh my god! It just like absolutely devolves within. We're less than 15 minutes in, already completely broken down. We were never going to get a good conversation with Kent Hovind involved. But it's kind of funny how fast it can devolve. In part because he's not willing to answer questions. He's not willing to engage with what his opponent actually says. He's going to reject the concept that he could be wrong about a thing before he knows what the thing is. I mean, really ask yourself, like, could you imagine being a person where you think nothing you ever do, like, you could not possibly be in error about anything? Because that's what you would basically have to believe to preempt I'm not in error when you don't know what the thing is yet. I don't know that Kent really believes he can never make a mistake, but he does sell himself like he can't ever make a mistake. Which is, I think, how you get people, these like pseudo cult leaders, right? Like the people, he effectively acts as these people's like savior or god or cult leader, even though I think he wouldn't argue. I don't think he would say it's a cult. I don't even know if it meets the definition of a cult, the people who follow him. And believe me, he does have a following. There are people that produce these videos and whatever. Grandpa over here doesn't know how to make a YouTube by himself.
Hold it. All right, you are the one pretending. You are pretending that a pine tree and an elephant are related. Come on, that's a pretend.
Okay. I don't need to pretend that. I'm trying.
This is also like assumed dishonest. Like he's he's pretending his opponent is dishonest, right? You pretend that these things are related. Well, even if Aaron was wrong about evolution, even if like evolution turned out to be incorrect, which again, as far as we know, it's not. He wouldn't be pretending. He sincerely believes it. But to say he pretends is to imply that he is lying about his belief and he's being dishonest from the outset, which is, well, it goes back to that saying, right? Every accusation is a confession.
Something to you. I'm trying to explain something to you, and you're trying to talk over me to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Well, go back and listen to the tape. Who's talking over who here?
Okay, let's
talking over me. I'm trying to explain something to you.
Let's kind of keep this. Let's keep this to.
And of course, not all interruptions are the same. If you are interrupting your opponent before they've really gotten out the thought, that is not the same as interrupting when they have already said something that is contentious. Aaron hasn't said anything contentious yet. He hasn't even laid out the idea yet. And I don't mean like the idea that Kent is in error isn't really like the meat of the statement. It's what is the error? Whereas Kent saying, evolution is this thing, and therefore evolution is this thing, is already a statement. And if that's an error, we can't move on, because anything you derive from that is going to be wrong necessarily.
Where everybody can follow. Okay.
Okay.
Kent, I'm gonna let you go and explain your thought process as to why Aaron is in error with that statement.
I do not envy the position these moderators are in. Now, they did this themselves. They're also the organizers. To come off as neutral, which is something that's kind of important from their position. They do at the very least need to seem neutral. Is very difficult when you have a situation like this of like, well, no, it's not really the same thing, when you interrupt to be like, nope, I can't be wrong, not an error, it's impossible, as opposed to, hold on, stop, you are lying about what evolution is, as an example. I don't envy this job. It's very difficult. I'm going to try not to appraise how well they do it, because I don't even know how it could be done well or better than this. I don't know.
So, Aaron, please let him.
Real quick,
let him finish,
let's make sure we get the names right. It's Aaron. Aaron Ra is actually his name, not Aaron, not Eric, not whatever. It's Aaron.
Okay, let's keep it on track so everybody that's listening can kind of follow, because you can't understand what either of you are saying when you jumping over each other. So just let Kent finish out his thought, Aaron, and then we'll shoot it over to you, and you can counter. Okay.
A week ago, I asked you to ask Aaron what is the best evidence for evolution. He responded by saying it is systematic phylogenetics. And he said in his...
I'll be honest, I wouldn't understand that response. I also wouldn't debate on this subject, but let's see if I think we can probably break down what that means. But I would not... Okay, I don't know that this is necessarily evidence for evolution. Maybe it's a description. I don't know. Maybe there's something like lost in translation here. I don't know that he necessarily is recounting this accurately. I would not. This is kind of a weird answer. A weird answer to that question. I don't know.
His little 3-minute YouTube clip. The only way Hovind can counter that is to meet the phylogeny challenge.
The phylogeny
which no
challenge
creationist will ever even attempt to do.
In case it doesn't come up here, as I recall, the phylogeny challenge is a challenge Aaron put out to opponents of evolution, which is to say, find two living species that are very closely related, that science would consider part of the same category, the same phylogenetic cluster. I forget what the phrase is, maybe clade. I don't remember what grouping they use. That science would consider very closely related, but are actually different kinds, because people like Kent will refer to different kinds. Is what show a place where it would be where you have an actual different system that is in disagreement and a reason why. Because part of what happens with people like this, and kind of evidence that they're grifters is they won't support their own positions. To the flat Earth community's credit, they do try to present a model, and that model is a good demonstration of why they shouldn't be trying. People like this shouldn't be trying, because it fails on basically every level, to the point where they have like the sun only emits light in a cone down onto the flat Earth, and it doesn't work otherwise. It's really, really wild. But Kant will say things like, "Oh, there are kinds, and these kinds are the dividing lines between groups. So like, there's dog kind or whatever." But he won't define where those lines are, and it comes up a little bit here. And trying to get him to answer the phylogeny challenge, which he won't ever attempt to do, obviously, is a good way of demonstrating that, making clear, like, all right, here's the bar that I want you to meet, and being very clear about it is a very good idea, and mentioning it, I think, is really helpful, even though it's not going to factor in very much, because Kent's never going to try to answer this.
Okay. First place, I hope to correct you a little bit here, Arndt. It is phylogenetic systematics, not systematic phylogenetics, but that's okay. According to evolution...
Even if that's true, like, the only point of this is to be like, see, I'm smarter than you, because this is all a show for him. It's about putting on a show, seeming strong in front of his followers, and hopefully finding some more. This is something that was broken down by Innuendo Studios in... I forget which of their videos, but one of the videos on the alt-right playbook, which I highly recommend. We'll add that to things I want to link in the description here. Let me just add that. I'll just link. Oh, I don't have the. Oh, I got deleted. I'll just link the entirety of the playlist, because I would recommend the alt-right playbook in its entirety. But there's a video where he talks about, on the left, or even liberals, or just people who are acting in good faith, debate is an opportunity to test ideas in the rigors of dissent to come to a conclusion and find the truth. That can be done well. I don't think that can be done in a debate that is for an audience. I think that can be done in a debate where you're actually discussing ideas and arguing them out with peers without trying to front to an audience. But if you're acting in bad faith, particularly on the right, debate is an opportunity to show strength in front of an adversary. Never back down, never concede, and keep the eyes on you as long as possible. This might, as Innuendo Studios points out in that video, might surprise you that this resembles exactly what presidential debates look like. Yeah, that's kind of a problem. I won't go into it too much, but we're seeing that here. It's just to look strong, to say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm smarter than you. And also why he doesn't like having less time. It doesn't allow eyes on him for as much time if he gets interrupted a lot.
.berkeley.edu. All life on Earth is united by evolutionary history. We are all evolutionary cousins, twigs on the tree of life. Phylogenetic systematics is the formal name for the field within biology that reconstructs evolutionary history and studies the patterns of relationships among organisms. Unfortunately, history is not something we can see. That is correct. Phylogenetic, from the dictionary,
I noticed how he's just like kind of talking.
Google here, relating to the evolutionary development and diversification.
He just wants to have time where his voice is going, where people are watching him. I don't even really have anything to say, because what he's saying is basically nothing. The whole point is the show. Also, there is one hint of something to talk about here, where he's talking about, like, oh, you can't observe history. People like him, Ken Ham, notably did this in his debate with Bill Nye, and I think a lot of creationists have to do this, where they say, oh, we can't observe history directly, therefore it's impossible to know the things that people claim to know about the past. But that's not true. The systems that we use to learn about what happened contemporarily are the same things that we use to find out what happened in the past. It's to have the idea of, like, you can't know what happened in the past would dismiss, like, the concept of forensics in terms of police work, for example. If you see a crime scene and you're like, oh, okay, well, I see this footprint here, so someone walked there and their footprint landed in this spot. to say like, oh, you can't observe history, you'd have to start rejecting that of like, oh, we can't know that. How do we know that that the footprint didn't just appear by happenstance? Like, God put the footprint there. Obviously, that's ridiculous, and I don't even think Kant would subscribe to this. But that is a logical ramification of the idea that you can't, like, since you can't directly observe the past, you can't know anything about it. But that's what creationists often have to push back on. So that's why he made a point to say, oh, that's true that you can't observe the past. That's very relevant to him, even though it's not really relevant at all to people who study things that happened in the past. And for what it's worth, you only ever study anything in the past. And I don't just mean like the speed of light difference between what you're looking at and when you actually see it. I mean things like if you want to study like literature, you're reading things written in the past. If you want to study, I mean, history is literally a study of events in the past. Most things that you would look into are things that have happened before, because as it turns out, you can't really observe things that haven't happened yet. And when you observe things that are happening now, that's usually through experimentation. That's the whole point. And the experimental portion is the only time when when you're observing what's happening then you publish a paper and people are reading about what happened in the past. As it turns out, the past is far more accessible than the present or future. But they make a big deal out of it like it's anything.
Of a species or group of organisms, or of a particular feature of an organism, for instance, the teeth or the bone structure, etc. And I'm holding in front of me, I'll show it from Encyclopedia Britannica 2005.
He's showing, but he doesn't
a
have his
phylogenetic
webcam on,
tree based on the nucleotide differences in the gene for cytochrome C. And they have all these creatures with lines drawn between them, showing that a human, a monkey, a dog, a horse, a pig, etc., and a moth and a screwworm and a tuna are all related to a common ancestor.
I'm going to turn this down a bit, so hopefully I'm more audible when I talk over this.
Why did they choose to use the phylogenetic tree based
on
cytochrome C?
Or it's too
Why did you make a tree based on the number of chromosomes? Or based on the adult body weight,
not saying anything.
Or based on life expectancy, or based on life or gestation period, or based on average number of offspring, or based on the number of teeth.
They have to focus on derived synapomorphies.
All of these things are features.
This is a little bit where Arendt's education on the subject is going to be a little inaccessible. I think most people don't know what the fuck he just said. I definitely don't, and that's because I'm not educated in the way that he is about it. I don't know how relevant it is to throw that in there. But like I don't know, Kent's just blathering. I don't know, it feels like you have to say something, right?
Features, and if you do a phylogenetic tree on any of these things, you get a wildly different tree. For example, penicillin has 2 chromosomes. Houseflies and tomatoes both have 12. If you did a phylogenetic tree, you would say houseflies and tomatoes are identical twins. Possum, redwood tree, and kidney beans all have 22 chromosomes.
And I'm guessing
they are not identical triplets. Humans have 46 chromosomes, and chimpanzees and tobacco both have 48. So if you did a phylogenetic tree based on anything other than what you want to believe, that there's somehow a relationship, you would get wildly different answers.
So is this do you notice the problem here? Oh yeah, if you use chromosomes as the basis, then you would get something very different and very weird. What's missing is there are reasons why phylogenetic trees are constructed the way they are. Those reasons are defended ahead of time. Like this methodology, it didn't just like... It's not like Arendt decided the methodology and wrote down the phylogenetic tree and then that's it now. He didn't come up with it. And I'm guessing it wasn't any one person who came up with how to categorize and classify species. But Kent is just kind of assuming that it's arbitrary and meaningless. There are reasons behind these things. And if you study it, maybe you'd find out what those reasons are.
So I think the evidence shows very clearly you're choosing and selecting a particular phylogenetic tree that anybody can make up. You can arrange things in any kind of order you want and draw lines between them, but all the phylogenetic trees are nothing but lines on paper that somebody decided to make a relationship. Like you think a pine tree and an elephant are related. That's a line on...
And of course he keeps going back to this because he wants to make it seem like when Aron Ra would draw the tree of life, he'll just put like pine tree and elephant next to each other, when it'll be more like what you see on this phylogenetic tree. There might be huge amounts of difference between these two, between where they land on this. This is far enough back. Actually, I wonder if let's see if it's live. If the phylogenetic tree, let me see if I can see the actual the actual phylogenetic tree on the Phylogenetic Explorer project, because if I can, then it will, like, we can see how far apart these things are. I'm not gonna digress into this too much. If it takes too long to figure out, or if it just doesn't load for some reason. What? Hello? Okay, it's not doing its thing. Never mind. All right, took too long. But they would, in fact, be very far apart.
That's not science. Science is something we observe, we study, we test, we demonstrate. Everybody that's ever done it will tell you elephants make baby elephants. No exceptions. Now, if you choose to...
And it's funny because with the phylogenetic understanding, the phylogenists would agree. That will only ever be the case. Remember, this tree that we keep going back to, everything that every eukaryote will always ever give birth to a eukaryote, because you can't outgrow your ancestry is one of the things Aron says a lot. So, like, yeah, that's true, and no one would disagree with you, but it's this disagreement by implication. A lot of people do this. This is something TERFs do all the time. They'll say, you can't change your biology. That is only a relevant statement if someone disagreed with that. But in my understanding, these people don't disagree with that. We understand. There's no one's arguing against that. But you invent your opponent by making an argument that would only make sense if they disagreed with it. It's another method of bad faith argument.
To believe, and I emphasize the word believe because it is a religious belief that you have, that elephants and pine trees are related, that's fine. I don't care what you believe. But I resent paying for that to be taught to all the kids in the school system.
Yeah, see, there it is.
That
There's
is
the political
not science.
message.
That's a religion in every sense of the word. Go ahead.
So he wants to differentiate between science and religion, which is really interesting. I wonder, back to what Peachy Keen was saying in the chat earlier, that, I wonder if he considers his belief not a religion, because he was talking about teaching high school kids earlier. He seems to be opposed to the idea of teaching religion, and he wants to instead teach science. But he thinks what he's saying is not religion and is science, even though it's derived from his religious beliefs and religious text. Even if you believe that it's scientifically verified, it would still be a religious claim and a religious belief, because it is ultimately from your religious text and laid out there. So it's I don't know how it's one of those, like, he's probably just lying here, right? But I don't know. It's strange that he would say, I don't want religion being taught, when he's actively bragging about teaching religion as a good thing. I don't know.
In no sense of the word is that a religion, because it is not faith-based, it's evidence-based. And it has nothing to do with any purpose for anything, much less anything to do with the beginning of the universe or what came prior to it. Nor does it require a belief. I would suggest that we both start from not believing anything and just review the possibilities.
So that's really great. Aron is doing a very good job of trying to make good arguments in a circumstance where his opponent is fighting making that possible with everything he can. But to say, okay, let's start by not believing anything, feels like, especially to the average viewer that I would expect, a very neutral position to say, yeah, you know what, you're right. Let's go in this with an open mind. It does still feel a little too charitable to the creationist position, because you're treating it like an equally viable option. However, if you go in not assuming anything and not believing anything ahead of time, that means you go in without believing a lot of the religious justifications that Kant needs to derive his position. Things like, well, the Bible says that there were 7 literal 24-hour days 6,000 years ago. If he can't bring that with him into the argument, he doesn't have any leg to stand on. Now, obviously, this is something that he's going to agree to, but it is a really good attempt from Aron's part. He's doing everything he can to demonstrate the differences between his approach and his opponents, and to make good arguments despite his opponent trying as hard as possible to make that impossible for Aron.
And one of the things we have to look at is the law of monophyly, which is an evolutionary law. This is the one that Ernst Mayr described as Darwin's second law of common ancestry. And this is where he says that multiplication of species is Darwin's third law, and this is the one that I refer to as biodiversity. In either case, it means that one species may diversify into 2, into 4, and 8, and etc., but that in every daughter lineage, evolution is just a matter of superficial changes being compiled against successive tiers of fundamental similarities.
Kent probably does not understand any of this, or doesn't care, or if he does understand, and he's just gonna ignore it. It doesn't matter, you know. I understand, Arn's making a good effort, and this is really good for the audience. It's just unfortunate that, you know, I just want to remind everyone his opponent's not going to be paying attention to this. He has to counter the idea that this is a religion because that is the only motivation for being against evolution. I mean, possibly, like, it is maybe not the only one, but I would agree that it is one that he can trick the average person into agreeing with, because a lot of people, especially more liberal-minded, and I mean this like big L liberal, you know, have that idea of like separation of church and state, and you shouldn't teach religion. So if you can paint it as a religion, it's a way of getting evolution out of schools, which is step 1 of a creationist project, right? Step 2 is teach the lie instead. But yeah, like I agree that I think it's definitely like more of an advocacy than something he believes in. It's just really weird. It's just really weird the kinds of things that you can put together as to what he would have to believe if you took his arguments, but obviously he doesn't believe any of it. This is actually a concept I want to come back to, not in the concept like we can put on these sheets, but well, maybe I can. This is the idea of like what a person would have to believe, slash what the world have to be like. And I'll go into this more when it comes up in more relevant conversations, but a lot of times you have to, like, you hear what a person says, and a useful tool when trying to understand a person's argument and their beliefs and their positions is to ask yourself, what would this person have to believe, or what would the world have to be like for them to believe this? And when you reach a contradiction, like we have with Kent, that it would be bad to teach evolution in schools because it's a religion, and also that my teaching religion is good, is kind of contradictory as far as what you would have to believe to say these things. It's there's definitely some either internal incongruence, because sometimes people don't realize they're contradicting themselves, or this is good evidence that they're lying to you or being dishonest in some way. Sorry, I keep bumping my desk, and I'm sure it's shaking my cam. I'm going to see if I can sit in a different way where that's not going to happen as much.
And it is those tiers of fundamental similarities which can be interpreted as derived synapomorphies, which is what they're basing the phylogeny on. I have heard creationists argue that a watermelon is 98% water and a cloud is 100% water, and so a watermelon only missed being a cloud by 2%. Or that we could classify an octopus as being,
which is really funny, right? Like, like I don't know how you hear that and don't laugh. Like, that sounds like the kind of thing I would say as a joke. I don't know if it's funny or sad that people are saying it unironically. That feels to me like what I would jokingly argue as a classification system of foods where everything is either soup, salad, sandwich, dessert, or a la carte, and then I'd have statements like, well, by this classification, a single ravioli is a sandwich, a plate of them is a salad, but if you add too much sauce, it becomes a soup. And like, as a joke, that's like, but like that people are saying this unironically. I've never heard it, but I'll take Aaron's word for it. He's not a dishonest person in anything that I've ever seen, so I'll believe him. But oh man, that's wild.
An ink pen, since it spits ink, and we can classify it as a spider because it has 8 legs. And these are all deliberate attempts to avoid the fact.
I don't love how he ended it there, because it feels like there's more to that sentence, right? The fact of what? I feel he should have finished the thought. Maybe what he needs to say is ignore the fact of the matter, which doesn't require elaboration, right? It kind of does. It implies a little bit. and we're gonna get some confusion for this reason. It feels really weird and abrupt to end the statement there.
Kent?
Avoid the fact of what? That an octopus is related to an ink pen? What?
Do you understand the law of monophyly?
The fact is that these things are wrong, right? That's what he's saying. To ignore the fact that that's not how things work. I think is the fill in there, but that we're not sure is. Yeah, I don't know why he didn't finish. I don't know. It does feel like the thought is unfinished there, and I don't know why he didn't finish it.
As I just described, it means that you can't outgrow your ancestry. That means that.
That's what I kept coming back to, right? A eukaryote will always give birth to a eukaryote. And further down, a mammal will always give birth to a mammal. And this is why a phylogenetic understanding is more useful in showing lineage than the like kingdom phylum order. I don't know what that's called. Maybe I should. I'll call Lamarckian, but I'm not sure if that's correct.
At no point in evolutionary history did one kind, which doesn't exist, ever become another kind, which doesn't exist either.
Well, we're going to get into
kinds. You just told me that elephants and pine trees are related. You do believe
they're still eukaryotes,
kinds.
Aren't they?
So that
He's
is
never
that's
going
They're still eukaryotes, aren't they?
So that proves they're related.
This is also a good example of like when you're arguing with someone with bad faith. Sometimes what you have to do is just embarrass them, make them look bad. Ask them this very simple question, which should even to his watchers seem weird that he's dodging, and maybe they'll ask themselves, well, yeah, they are, I guess. And maybe they'll write off like, oh, like that means they're related. But, it's coming after Kent in a way that shines a light on his dishonesty.
They're still eukaryotes or no?
Yes. Does that prove
they're related? And they never became a different kind. Ever.
I think he could be a little more clear. Just like they're the eukaryote kind. And they produce after their kind. One of the things, it's going to come up, that's why I haven't talked about it very much, but Kent has this big thing about kinds, and creatures produce after their own kind, and this is biblical reference, but what that means is vague to the point of uselessness. And it will come up, don't worry.
So your definition of kind would include a pine tree and an elephant as the same kind of creature.
Strap in, folks.
Are they both eukaryotes or no?
Are you drunk?
Are they both eukaryotes?
Yes.
Okay, then they are both the same kind in that respect, right?
By this nobody's definition of kind. Ask a 5-year-old.
What happens when we look at the Bible, for example? What the Bible says about kinds?
How many? We're going to get into it.
Yeah, the Bible mentions the beast kind.
10 times
about that.
Okay, no, wait a minute. 10 times in Genesis.
We're talking about the beast kind. Can you identify what is and isn't in the beast kind?
So now we're going to take
it. Let me say what you asked. What the Bible says. The Bible in the very first chapter.
Let him talk a little bit about kinds.
1, 10
not
times
too much, though.
Says they will bring forth after their kind. So the kind has to do with bringing forth, and I can help you here. I taught biology. Elephants and pine trees cannot bring forth.
Because of the evolutionary law of monophyly, we have one cannot become a different kind. You can speciate. You can get to a point where you have speciation, where they no longer can interbreed with the parent stock or maybe with their sister species, but they didn't become a different kind.
And remember, Kent believes this. He has to, for a number of reasons. One of them was, I think, very well put in the debate that Ken Ham and Bill Nye had some years ago. That was pretty well talked about, so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you have seen it. But Bill Nye pointed out, like, well, how many animals are on the Ark, right? You can't have had millions of animals on there. And certainly not all the species that exist. There'd be no way. So the solution to that is to say that there were some number of kinds, and from there they diverged. And so Kent, might believe that that's why I'll say things like it's the dog kind, and maybe wolves and dogs are both the same kind, but he believes speciation happens, which is a fundamental component of evolution. And if he were honest, he would have to admit that the belief in speciation must therefore lead to belief in evolution. But he needs to draw that distinction, and this is why we're talking about like, okay, what are we talking? Like, what do you even mean by kinds?
They are still the parent category that they belonged to, and this applies to everything in the human phylogeny. We still belong to every one of our ancestral clades.
Kent, explain to everybody what you mean by kind, so that we're all on the same page.
Well,
Aaron just explained what he meant, so you kind of go through what.
And Ken, can you explain in kinds in reference to what Aaron's saying in regards to monophyletic clade?
I really liked the first moderator jumping in here. The second one was like, I'm not mad about it. I think it was a little less, it comes off a little less impartial, but I like this focusing the conversation. No, like, oh, I see we're about to get off track, and so we're cutting in. It's very honest in that way, and then but also framing it in a way of like, okay, let's get things back on track and like, cool it down a bit by having you answer this question that's important, which is neutral if the people you're in this discussion are being honest, but because Kent is actively running from any sort of academic understanding, it is actually using it's kind of a biased way of getting about it, of the moderator is asking him this question, not merely his opponent. So it's one of those it's only biased because Kent is dishonest.
When he's talking about Meyer's law of monophyly, can you kind of join them together to explain your version of a kind in relationship to something in a monophyletic clade?
Well, let's take this one question at a time. The Bible 10 times in Genesis chapter 1 mentions the word kind, and 10 more times in the flood story, Genesis 6 and 7. So 20 times in the first 7 chapters, it talks about Noah bringing the animals in the 6 and 7, chapter 6 and 7, bringing the animals onto the ark after their kind. So it has to do with bringing forth and for them to get two of each kind on board the ark. I can assure you a pine tree and an elephant are not the same kind of animal in the biblical way of thinking, or in anybody else.
Are either one of them in the beast kind?
A pine tree is not in the beast kind, no.
But an elephant is?
An elephant
Notice even
is a beast.
how he answers the question. Are either one of them in the beast kind? And he says a pine tree is not. Because what Kent wants to do is make his opponent seem ridiculous because Aaron thinks they are in the same kind. But what he didn't do was answer the question, which should have been very easy even for him to answer. Why didn't he say, yeah, elephants are in the beast kind? Because that's committal. Because now he is saying something that to which he can be held to account. Whereas if he just says pine trees aren't, you can't it wouldn't make sense to try to prove him wrong on that. It's not really that committal.
It's a beast of the earth.
Okay,
yes,
how many different types of beasts are within the elephant or within the beast kind? Well, and how can we distinguish them?
And this is great. Now, asking him okay, let's have you construct a model. Let's have you, because it's one thing to say you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Okay, fine. Let's say you're right. Let's have you say anything specific, because even if you could prove evolution wrong, you won't have proved creationism.
Current estimate is there are 7,000 or 8,000 kinds of animals on land.
How many of them are beasts?
Breathe air. That would be
how many of them belong to the beast kind?
I don't know. That's a great question.
Okay, so
we don't know, but I thought you were a science teacher who said this is your
kinds
subject.
Of beasts. There's not just the beast kind. There's also kinds of beasts within the beast kind.
Well, that's a great question. But see, I'm not asking for my theory to be taught at taxpayer expense. You are. So the burden
and the one I have is actually...
Hold on one second.
Now, just complete distraction, right? His feet are being held to the fire even a little bit, digressing completely. I'm not asking for it to be taught. First of all, yes, you are. You bragged about teaching high school kids. But also that has nothing to do with anything. Isn't this your subject? Isn't this what you're here to debate? You claim to be so knowledgeable about it that you can argue with people who have studied evolution a significant amount. Some of the people he's talked to have PhDs in the subject. I don't know what Aaron's education level is on the subject. I know he's well educated about it. I don't know what the education level is or was at this time. And yet, so why don't Kent? Why don't you know basically anything? The very simplest question someone could ask about your belief system. Why don't you have answers to that if you're supposed to be educated about it? It's pretty reasonable, not great argumentative, but very good for tearing down a very dishonest actor. But of course, he changes the subject immediately.
Actually justified, and yours is not. You're arguing for kinds, which means did you catch when I said that the only way to address this would be to address the phylogeny challenge? Did you follow that? Do you even know what the phylogeny challenge is?
I do, but let's just fix
it. Okay, what is the phylogeny challenge?
Arn, hold on 1 second. Arn. Let him finish out an answer. Go ahead.
Peachy Keen said, it sounds like it would be easier for him to simply take a stance against public schooling in general if he doesn't want certain things taught at taxpayer expense. I mean, maybe he does. Like the way he was teaching was, my understanding was in homeschools or like Christian schools where the standards are a lot lower. In that, you know, they'll let someone like Kent Hovind teach children. Maybe he is in favor of that, but I don't think his campaign and his advocacy is that far-reaching. I don't think he actually cares. I think all he wants is that he can trick people into giving him enough money to live his life and live the life he wants to live. Maybe he also would like, you know, he would maybe aspire to creationism being taught in schools, but arguing against public education doesn't allow for that. Because remember, it's always like, oh, I just don't want you to teach this in public expense. Well, oh, if you get rid of public schooling, then that would solve it. But he does want, as much as he says he doesn't, he does want creationism taught in schools. And so getting rid of public education doesn't solve that problem either.
Kent, we're going to give you the time to finish out your answer and let him.
Yeah, you're bringing up 5 or 6 topics. Okay.
Oh, and by the way, maybe you meant still responding to chat here. Maybe you meant to point out like a hypocrisy of his. This is sometimes useful. I think it's often ineffective because, I mean, he's a grifter. Like, he doesn't really believe in anything, and hypocrisy isn't like that big of a deal for the people who believe it. Like, anyone who would follow Kent Hovind isn't on the lookout for this kind of hypocrisy or would care really that much about it. I don't think. I mean, maybe they would, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much hypocrisy lands with people like this. Hypocrisy mostly lands with people who have real positions and believe things honestly.
The Bible, which says very clearly the animals bring forth after their kind. Therefore, the ability to bring forth seems to be directly related into deciding what exactly is a kind.
All right, he's committed to a thing. Kind has to do with bringing forth.
For people. There are 200 recognized species.
But this already is in contradiction with what he has to believe, because he was saying there's something like 7,000 kinds. Well, so you say, oh, well, I thought it was about bringing forth for example, what are 2 things he might call the same kind? Like a house cat and a tiger are both the cat kind, but they can't bring forth. You know, that's the species divide. They can't procreate. So are they different kinds then? Then how are there only 7,000? None of it works. But to believe this, you can't think in this way. It's just God said so, you know, or very often Kent said so. Or Kent said God said so kind of thing. But, you know, you can even see this is why he tries very hard not to commit to saying anything of substance, because as soon as he says anything, it's in contradiction with what he says. It's very easy to tear down any proposed model he would even attempt to provide.
Of squirrels in the world. They are the same kind of animal called a squirrel. That's from National Geographic.
Anything other than squirrels that are in that kind?
Oh, we're going to be at this a long time.
I don't know.
Is there a squirrel? Okay, so there's a squirrel kind. So God created a primordial group of a pair, I guess, of squirrels. And then he created is there a chipmunk kind as well?
Right, trying to hold
whether the chipmunk and squirrel are related would be a good study for biology. But I think
it would. But then why haven't you done it at all, right? Why aren't you, who believes in this, why aren't you doing any of the quote-unquote science that you think is so important? This is a pretty reasonable method of attack, even though I guess this is a hypocrisy argument. I don't know. Maybe the hypocrisy argument's not bad. I have to think about what I was saying earlier about hypocrisy arguments. I'm not sure I agree with the argument I was making earlier. It made sense at the time, but the more I think about it, I think there are problems with it.
Good. It would define what a kind is.
Sure.
So did God create 2 rodents wait, there's a rodent kind. So now we have squirrels, we have chipmunks, do we have rabbits in that? Are we going to put Lagomorphs into that same kind as well?
And you're talking over me again. I don't interrupt you.
Distracting
now
from
listen,
the point. Like, just
there are
question,
200 recognized species, and I'll use the word species, of squirrels. I think they're probably all interfertile. There are 350 breeds of horses.
He thinks that.
You get into
prove it,
different names here, what they mean. What is a breed name? What is a species? What is a family? A genus? A kind? The biblical definition of kind was given, or the word kind was used way before Carolus Linnaeus was ever thought of. So Carolus Linnaeus came up with our current classification system.
Linnaeus, that's what it was. Not
the horses, for instance, the horse, the zebra can interbreed. The ass, the Shetland pony, You can get a zebra, a shebra, a zebras, a zedonk, a zeonki, a zorse. They probably are the same kind. I don't know exactly where the line is, but I think it's pretty obvious in most cases that.
Well, clearly not.
But not knowing where the line is the reason why this isn't the
science. You think a pine tree and an elephant are the same kind? What on earth is wrong
But
here?
you think there are kinds within kinds.
I think it might be good to say, like, so do you, because you agree that they're the eukaryote kind, but he hasn't, like, he hasn't put it in those explicit terms yet. I mean, he's not going to attempt this avenue. He has his own approach that he's going for, and for the most part, I think it's a good idea to just keep holding him to the fire. All right, I gotta stop talking as much about this. We're never going to
within the rodent kind. So it sounds like you're defining what clades are, which of course would all connect to each other, because trees and elephants are both eukaryotes, as we said.
That's
so
I'm happy to go for quite a while. Even
do we
like
get to where God created a primordial pair who then diversified into all these other clades?
Well, that, like I said, would be a great field of study.
That's the phylogeny challenge.
Well,
so you have to show me. And I made a video about this for anybody that's curious. Please look up the phylogeny challenge. It is really the death knell for all creationist arguments, because it can't be addressed.
So Aaron, you're asking in the phylogeny challenge for the original type of pair that created all the other supposed kinds and subclassifications.
Yeah, if there was any truth to creationism whatsoever.
The way the moderator asked the question, I think, could have been done a little bit better. Again, I'm trying not to evaluate them too much, but it's hard to stop myself. But yeah, asking Aaron here, asking Aaron a clarifying question comes off as very fair, because you were asking Kent before. You should do the same. And the only way in which it's not fair is that Aaron is happy to answer. He's happy to clarify. Kent wants to distract and evade. So yeah, what do you mean by like clarify? What is the phylogeny challenge? Make it clear and concise so we know what we're talking about and know what it is that you want Kent to answer.
Or if the theory of evolution was fundamentally flawed in any way, then there would have to be a point where, as Kent does, he accepts a certain degree of phylogeny, but it has to trace back to an original set of created kinds. And it can't be, well, that would be an interesting question, since they're both rodents, and both rodents are eutherians, and all eutherians are mammals, and you can trace it all the way back to eukaryotes.
Would that have
so
to
where is the dividing line?
Too? With the phylogeny challenge, would it also have to show and demonstrate speciation rates to show this original mating pair to diversify to all these species that are out there relating to whatever the original kind that Kent is referring to?
Well, the speciation rate isn't really relevant unless you put a time constraint on it.
7,000 years.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's I don't know if he's making reference to that debate or just like a common point of criticism. This came up in the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate as well, of like, okay, let's say we accept, okay, there's the Noah's flood and all the animals came from the ark and there were these 7,000 kinds. Well, one of the problems you have is we have so many known species today. In order to have, in this time period, to have that much speciation, we'd have to have something like 7 new species every day since then. Not like you go in your backyard and you wouldn't see, oh, that's a new bird. You'd be like, that's a new species of bird that didn't exist yesterday. And that rate just stopped now that we right before we started observing it, because that's the other thing, is we don't see that kind of speciation continuing. So clearly it's even more exaggerated by the fact that as soon as humans are around to notice it, it stopped that absurd rate. And I think that's what he's referencing.
Well, if he's going to imply his own time constraint, then he has this issue that he would have to address as well, because that's just going to further complicate his position.
I will gladly address that if you stop interrupting and bringing up 20 more topics.
That question, the question of the number of species that were supposed to be on the ark and how many species we have now, I think that can be the subject of an entire debate unto itself with a creationist. I think that is, if in a position like this, you could, I think, very justifiably make that the only thing that you talk about as the reason why creationism does not work.
Okay.
It's the same topic. It's been the same topic.
And it gives you more time to go, to force the
after
issue.
their kind. I will make the statement that probably
Aaron
Noah had
chalice
2
of beer.
squirrels on the ark.
I love it.
They have diversified into 200 species of squirrels.
So here he is,
Black
right? He's
ones,
admitting to
white ones,
believing in
brown ones.
speciation.
That is not evident, and that could happen in 4,400 years. We have 339 breeds of dogs that have been developed in the last 300 years. Yes, it can happen very quickly. There are biological factors.
But it's not just that it happened
like
very
the
quickly.
Kaibab and
It
the
also
Abers squirrel,
stopped.
just by geographic isolation across the Grand Canyon, have developed and look pretty different.
And of course,
whether they're
this
still
is a bit of a
reproductively
distraction
capable,
because
I don't know.
the phylogeny
Put them
challenge
together and find
isn't
out.
about this issue.
There are 800 breeds of cattle recognized worldwide.
It is about where are the dividing
they fall
lines
into two main types,
of
according
kinds,
to Wikipedia,
if
just
I
a couple
understand
days
correctly.
ago, yesterday. Okay, so 800 breeds of cattle, I think we would agree, are probably the same kind of animal. Noah might have had 10 cows on the ark, or 20, and we now have 800 breeds. I don't know what he had on the ark. I'm not asking for mine to be taught at taxpayer expense.
You are.
But if you think a cow and a pine tree are related, and an elephant and a bacteria, I think that's a stretch of anybody's imagination. I have
this is something Kent goes back to all the time. He has like the imagination. He thinks it's like SpongeBob fairy tale. He that's what he keeps referring to, the evolution. That's why he'll keep using certain terms. They're just kind of like catchphrases of his. You'll hear imagination a lot. SpongeBob fairy tale. It's if it feels weird, and why is he using that word specifically? Just one of his catchphrases he thinks is clever. This is like some boomer ass humor of like, if I just say it repeatedly, it's funny, right? And it wasn't funny the first time. If he's willing to accept 200 kinds of squirrel diversity. Yeah, well, okay, so he wants to oppose it in part because like it's his grift, but also, you know, it's in conflict with biblical biblical biology, if you want to call it that. Like, I don't know. I wouldn't ask so much the question of like why he wants to oppose these things. Like, I don't know. Well, maybe it's useful. I guess I just don't have great answers for it. It's like it's kind of his grift. This is what he decided to do. Maybe it's, and I think he does understand that it's the same thing. Creationists will often draw a line between what they call microevolution and macroevolution. They'll say microevolution is speciation, but they can only diversify within their own kind. Differentiating past that would be macroevolution, and this is how you can get things like large schisms between something like we see at this level of the phylogeny explorer thing, right? Like the difference between like Archaea and Eukaryota. Those divisions they think are impossible. Now, in actuality, yes, speciation is do enough speciation and you get what they call macroevolution. There's not actually a difference, but they pretend to have this distinct, or at the very least, they say they make this distinction because that is closer to defensible. I can't really explain why he decided to make this thing. That you probably have to like go into how he was raised and shit, but this is how they approach it.
The different cats.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't really know how to answer some of the questions you're asking in chat.
A cross between a jaguar and a lion. So possibly the jaguar and a lion are the same biblical kind.
He says possibly, but like he has no actual
there are
answers.
30 recognized
Unwilling to do any
chickens
actual
in the
biology, even in his worldview. Yeah, I guess that's fair. Yeah, I mean, it is relevant to know why these people are like this. I think you'd have to do a lot of like background on the person as to why like this is the grift he wanted and not another, and why like he might honestly believe in biblical creationism. Maybe evolution is something where like I don't know how much it's like he's lying or just rejecting the fact that he's been given evidence that should prove that he's wrong. Yeah, I guess I just don't really have the answers that I would need. Or I don't have the information I would need to answer these questions. Interesting. Yeah, I agree.
And it says the jungle fowl is the original bird from which all varieties and strains of domesticated chickens are derived. Man has developed domesticated chickens. Some lay more eggs, some have more meat, some live longer, some produce more offspring. They can select for a certain characteristic that they want, but they're still
now he's even talking about natural selection.
And a 5-year-old knows that. They could recognize right away the difference between a chicken and a pine tree. Why you can't, I don't know. But
what do you mean I
different.
can't? I just read to you the law of monophyly, which shows that you can't. There's always going to be a chicken. It's never going to not be a chicken. All its descendants, no matter how much they change, they're going to still be chickens. Why? Because of the law of monophyly. And those chickens are still going to be neonate birds. They're still going to be birds.
And this is why, by the way, chickens are dinosaurs. Like all birds are still dinosaurs. They are descendants of dinosaurs, and you can't outgrow your ancestry. You never became a different thing. Or I shouldn't say you never became a different thing. You never stopped being what they were. which is kind of interesting. But now he's going back. But Kent talked too long about something that he can be held to account, so now he has to go back to. But you think this thing, only slightly misrepresenting the position, but still misrepresenting it and bringing it back to an attack, because it is much more effective for creationists to simply argue against evolution, even though that doesn't prove their position. And that's what I like about the phylogeny challenge, is that it is asking for proof of the creationist position. It's demanding it, really. And it's the kind of thing that can't really be presented outside of, well, the book I like a lot says so.
Not the bird kind, because the Bible doesn't describe what a kind is. Matter of fact, it says there's all sorts of birds, and it doesn't describe what a sort is either. But we have the idea that we have all kinds of birds.
So we have and a reminder to everybody, the Bible wasn't written in English either. Translations and fuzziness between different languages is well noted. We even have a phrase called lost in translation, where certain concepts just don't work the same way based on how the languages work. They cover different ideas than others. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew, which is as I understand it, died as a language and then was reborn at some a few hundred years later or something like that. But it was a formerly dead language. There's a little bit of uncertainty if the modern version of Hebrew even if functions the same way as ancient Hebrew would. And the New Testament was written in Greek, then written in Greek, and the people depicted in it would have been speaking what's the language? Oh, I forget what language it was speaking, but would have been speaking a different language, not Greek. So all of these translations come into play when he's insisting on this word kind is really important. Of the word might not even mean what you think it means. It's been translated so many times and in so many different and interpreted in so many different ways, and huge problems with this, because I don't know if it comes up here or in follow-up discussions that these same people had about this conversation, where the Bible says that whales are the fish kind because they're in the water, and locusts are both locusts and bats are the same kind because they both swarm, but then bats are also the bird kind. There's a lot of none of it works, but people Kant won't talk about what their views actually are, and instead will claim incorrect things about what their opponent's views are and make that the only subject of discussion. So the phylogeny challenge is a great way of saying, no. You give me something I can test. If you want to say this is true, give me something I can test and demonstrate.
Kinds within kinds, which sounds like it's describing the same thing as clades, but the difference being, and this is the important thing that you keep missing, is that there has to be a point where they're not all related. So it says all kinds of birds, implying that there's different kinds of birds. So there were individual creations, yet they're all birds. So why are they not the bird kind? So can you give me me a distinction between kinds?
You mentioned the law of monophyly. What is the ancestor between the pine tree and the elephant?
Right,
what does that ancestor look like? And why didn't it always bring forth?
I'm not going to answer a question.
Why
I'm going to have you answer one.
It did. You mean an elephant and a pine tree are still the same kind?
That's right. They're still eukaryotes.
Okay. Well, I think if
you use the word kind, I know I've mentioned it a bunch of times, but I think if Aaron used some of the same terminology to make clear to Kent and people watching, more importantly, people who like Kent, that you say eukaryote kind, I think that might have a better impact. And this is just a minor nitpick for what I think is overall a good approach to dealing with someone like this.
Confused any time. I can show you which is a tree and which is an elephant. I think probably.
I can do that too. See, you've described evolutionary principles for the last 5 minutes. I've no contest with that. I'm waiting for the creationist principles to come in.
Right, exactly. Make him commit to a thing.
I've told you several times.
What
the Bible
is it you
says
believe?
if they can bring forth, they are the same kind.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. Aaron is really great about this. I would recommend his channel. He talks a lot about phylogeny and biology. If I'm not mistaken, he even has videos going over different groupings of all right, here's my video on this phylum or whatever. I remember seeing those recommended to me. I didn't watch them myself. Aaron's a really good person to watch for this. I believe Gutsick Gibbon also talks about this on her channel. There are some people who talk a lot about the science here and do a lot of science popularizing. They are definitely out there, but I agree it's hard to find them and find quality people who talk about these things.
Unless they've now speciated. Would you, and you accept that, I've seen in some of your other videos, you accept that speciation happens so they can no longer bring forth.
Speciation happens, but it's
cool.
within very strict limits.
On board.
There are 200
what are the
species.
Limits?
Well, there are 200 species of squirrels. Someday there may be 500 species of squirrels. That doesn't.
What are the limits?
Now, he's not going to say what he doesn't want to answer direct questions, but of course the limits he's implying is that they can't do what they would call macroevolution. You can't escape your kind. Now, a phylogenetic view of biology would, in a way, agree with that, right? A squirrel will never give birth to it will never have a descendant that's a non-squirrel. But what Kent was meaning to imply is that you can't have such great deviations that we might call them different things. Like a squirrel, can't give birth to like new species that is different than squirrels. Or I guess, how would I even explain this? Because it's hard to explain contemporarily without knowing what they are. But like, the predecessor of both monkeys and humans can't separate in that way because monkeys and humans are different kinds. That's what he's trying to say the limits are.
Limits.
That's what he would say.
I think
but
the limit
he
is
tries
called
not to answer
squirrel.
questions.
They're always going to be what's called a
because
squirrel.
of the law of monophyly.
By the way, this is where some amount of the misunderstanding of evolution benefits Kent again. Is he'll say, you think things can become different kinds, so show me a squirrel that became a non-squirrel. But if Aaron could do that, his beliefs would be wrong because phylogenetically, a squirrel can only have progeny that are squirrels. So if he found one that wasn't, it would prove phylogeny wrong. Instead, it's not that they will produce a non-squirrel, but it might produce two things that are not the same as each other, and those will be categorized separately. But they're both subcategory squirrel, just like apes are, like humans and monkeys are different things, but we both came from a thing that was an ape. Or at least I think monkeys are in the same way. Or at the very, like, humans and gorillas are a better example. Humans and gorillas are different things as we consider them, but they both came from an ape. And the descendants of that ape are all apes.
They're always going to be eukaryotes, too. They're always going to be mammals. They're always going to be eutherians. None of those things are going to change.
Actually,
you are still,
exactly what I was just talking about.
You still belong to every clade your evolutionary ancestors did. There was no point where you stopped being what they were.
I mean, it's just a way of approaching this might be to talk about like siblings. Like, you and your sibling are never going to stop being what your parent being. You're never going to stop being descendants of your parents, but you might have, I don't know, for something trivial, you might have brown hair and your sibling might have red hair, and maybe all of your progeny share that trait, and those are two different things, but derived from the same thing, right?
Pine tree.
Did I say or imply in any way that you were descended from a pine tree?
You said I'm still a eukaryote, and so are the pine trees.
Are you telling me that you are not a eukaryote?
Are you a pine tree?
Did I tell you that all eukaryotes
This is where things break down again. I don't think this approach is
so
right,
are you
but
a
like
pine tree?
a series of back and forth questions.
Up the tape. When did I tell Kent Hovind
so
that
ridiculous.
all eukaryotes are pine trees?
No, I didn't. You said no.
What
You
he
didn't
said,
say.
what he said for clarification, what he said was that all pine trees are eukaryotic. They're all eukaryotes, but not all eukaryotes are pine trees. Correct?
Okay, I understand.
Okay.
But your ancestors...
At no point in your evolutionary history did a eukaryote give birth to a non-eukaryote. So, and the same thing applies throughout. So all the hundreds of times that in the last 20 years you kept saying a dog never produces a non-dog. I'm sorry, that's always been wrong. That's always been a straw man. That has never been a correct criticism of evolution. That has been a description of an evolutionary law which you have failed to understand these decades.
No, I think I completely understand it. Dogs always
just demonstrated other
I don't
and will now do so again.
Let him get it out. Let him get it out.
I will say it again. But dogs do always produce dogs. Do you know of an exception to that?
Because of the evolutionary law of monophily, that is true. And dogs remain conoidean carnivores. They never became a non-carnivore when they produced the first dogs. Still a carnivore. Still a member of every one of its parental clades. Same thing with cats. Phalloidean carnivores are still carnivores. Dogs, cats, both carnivores.
This is a good way of, maybe could have been expressed better. I'm not saying it was bad, but a good way of putting it out, like dogs and cats, both carnivores, both descended from the same thing, right? A good way of laying it out, especially for something that's closer to an intuitive understanding than pine trees and elephants. But of course, Kent wants to go to the extremes to make it as unintuitive as possible, because he can only operate with an intuitive understanding. And if you try to think about it past that, it won't work.
Good question. Are pine trees carnivores?
He's actually very good at his grift.
Because carnivora is limited to a subset of mammals and trees are not even animals, no.
But you think elephants and pine trees and dogs are related?
Are still eukaryotes, yes.
So, but at some point they became carnivores. Something happened.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. And I've got a series of videos explaining the evolutionary stages of that, if anybody listening to this cares. It's called The Systematic Classification of Life, where I go through some of the major clades. We're up to episode 24, and we've just now gotten to mammals. So there's another dozen or so videos in that series at least to come.
That ought to be exciting. Okay. So pine trees and elephants and dogs are related. At some point, the ancestor of whatever that ancestor looked like, diversified, and obviously elephants and dogs and pine trees look different today and behave differently and are now in certainly different species. Yeah. I would assume different families and maybe
families,
even kingdoms. Well, they're different kingdoms, plant and animal kingdom, aren't they?
The families and kingdoms really don't matter. Those are Linnaean constructs, and they're not really applicable.
It's not really.
The only thing that has a hard definition. The only thing that has a hard definition is the thing with the hardest definition is species. So everything else, all of these other taxonomic groupings, these grades that Linnaeus came up with, they serve only as signposts anymore, because he wasn't aware of how many increments there were between each of these different levels.
So Carolus Linnaeus was not aware that a pine tree was different than an elephant?
Let's try this.
Yeah, it's like way off the
you're trying to misrepresent this as much as you can, because obviously I never said anything like that.
Derail the conversation.
However, you did mention the 5-year-old could tell them apart. Now, what were the examples that you gave? A dog, an elephant, and a pine tree?
Do you think a 5-year-old could tell the difference between those?
Yeah, I think a 5-year-old doing the old Sesame Street game of one of these things is not like the other could probably pretty easily depict that the pine tree is the odd one out.
It is kind of telling that Kent's version of science is deferring to what is understandable by a 5-year-old. Like, there are a lot of scientific concepts that 5-year-olds are not going to get. Does that make them wrong? It's just so weird. Like, a really good one would be, for thousands of years, people thought larger objects fell faster until, I think it was Galileo, was like, actually tried it and was like, oh no, actually, they don't. And, like, to a 5-year-old, that might seem wrong. Does that make it incorrect? It's so strange. Why are we deferring to this?
Would you agree with that?
Very good.
Well, he does, because it's only operating on intuition.
There's hope. Go ahead. Keep going.
Okay. I can't imagine that anybody, even in your following, could possibly think that you're the one that understands this and I'm not.
I think they all.
I think he's taking the bait a little bit of
like
the personal attacks.
But go ahead.
I don't know what else you can do.
Okay. Using the same description, you can find other things that are closer and eliminate the dog from the elephant by finding things that are closer to those. Using that same simple principle, once you realize derived synapomorphies, which things matter, which things don't. You can't decide that a certain type of parrot isn't a parrot because it's green, for example. You can't make up arbitrary rules like that. If you want to categorize any collective, you have to find the traits that are already contained within every member universally accepted in that set before you can decide whether some new addition belongs there or not. Do you understand that?
Well, let's say we're going to accept the traits of an animal to be something.
Okay, so you didn't answer that question.
Well, you've asked me about 14 questions here and
left
them
unanswered. One question. You didn't answer that one question.
Well, let's go back to the original.
You've got another question instead of the answer.
Well,
that's all right. It doesn't matter. Go ahead. You change the subject however you want.
Go back and listen to this tape, Aaron. You changed the subject repeatedly.
No, I'm still on the same subject. and you're trying to derail. But go ahead. Change it.
Not.
Whatever.
Hey, we're off the rails again. Yay!
All right. Ask your question again, very directly, very succinctly, and then we'll have Kent directly answer that single solitary question, not going back to anything that's been previously discussed up to date. Just what question did you just ask that you want him to have a direct answer to?
Well, no, I didn't get to answer the very first one yet about what is a species or what is a biblical kind. I'm trying to answer that.
Start there, because that is the same. That topic has not changed. Yeah. It's the same thing I've been talking about since the beginning. He thinks it's multiple subjects. It's not. It's just that he has no clue what he's talking about. I mean, so please, let's get back to the one and only subject we've been discussing so far. Identify kinds as distinguished from other kinds. Give me a couple of different.
So I'm pausing here because I want to let it sink in. This is the only thing we will talk about for the whole discussion. If I remember right, this is the literal only subject, and we can't get past it. And there's another hour and a half to go. That's how off the rails that things will get, because Kent will not answer our question.
Species, for example, that we can identify as being different created kinds. Things that ideally scientists would consider closely related. Not as far apart as you can find them, but something that scientists would say, well, these are both in this group, and you say, no, these are both individual creations. Give me that example.
Okay, I have in front of me a picture that I got from the internet 2 days ago showing carnivora, which includes panthers, the skunk, the otter, the familiar dog, the Canis familiaris and Canis lupus, the wolf, and they have lines drawn connecting them all to a common ancestor. And I would like to point out that in the panther kind, there are, according to A to Z Animals.com, 7 different subspecies of leopard.
What are you talking about?
Which differ in their appearance. The African leopard is the most common. I would suspect those 7 different leopards had a common ancestor, and it was a cat. Okay.
So let me ask for clarification purposes. When I say kind, and you say kind, we are obviously talking about something different.
Correct.
Now, you are describing, though you aren't aware of it, you are describing a clade. And when I use the word kind as distinguished from clade, the only difference is that the kind begins with a special creation. So a kind will not be part of another larger kind. Mm. You follow me?
Oh, I guess I see what you're saying. Yeah,
kind is part of the
that's where it would have to be, right? If you believe that macroevolution is impossible and only microevolution and speciation is possible, then the difference between kinds would have to be that they were created specially by God, right? This is what he's getting at. So there must therefore have been a certain number of initial kinds. What are they? And again, it's just rephrasing the phylogeny challenge.
Kind.
Okay, so the answer was a yes or no question about whether you follow this. Evidently, you do not. Do you understand that a kind is the beginning of a clade, the crown of a clade, from which there is no commonality? So that these two.
I don't think
if you wanted to start with squirrel, if you want to call it a kind, then God created two squirrels, and then he separately created
as far as
chipmunks and everything that a squirrel likes.
He has an aptitude
within
for grifting.
That division of rodents.
But I don't think.
And then there's the parent category of rodents.
Yeah, I've never studied to see if a chipmunk and a squirrel could have a common ancestor. What is their chromosome number? Is it possible they had a common ancestor?
Why does he care?
That's what the phylogeny challenge is. It's to establish what a kind is, and a kind is not a clade. So if you're talking about parental groups from which that include all of their descendants, and that's what you're describing, then you're describing clades, not kinds.
I think this is a distinction that's not super relevant for the purposes of taking down Kent. I understand that this demonstrates in some way his scientific illiteracy. I don't think you have to work too hard for it, and I think there's a little, honestly, even this might be more work than is necessary to demonstrate that. But it invites the opportunity for him to quibble about terms of no, not clades, kinds. If you just say, all right, these are different kinds, right? Where is the starting point of the kind from which things deviate? It's not strictly necessary to get into the clade thing. It just gives him the opportunity to obfuscate. I don't think he does very much, but it's an opportunity, right? It's a vulnerability that you're presenting.
The difference between a clade and a kind is that the kind is a clade that begins with a special creation. So give me an example of two different kinds, two different special creations where those clades began with those special creations, but which science would consider closely related or within a parental clade.
Would you agree that the 7 different leopards of the world probably had a common ancestor and it was a leopard?
So, first of all, he's answering with a question, right? Doesn't want to answer. And I think what's really important about the question, of course, is that, hey, I want you to pick things that are really, really closely related, but you think are different kinds. As closely related as you think is possible, while still being different kinds. And it's to try to find the dividing line, but that is something that Kent would have to commit to. So he's never gonna try.
No.
You don't agree with that? Okay.
Well, no, I agree that the leopards would have a common ancestor that was a leopard, and that all panthers also have a common ancestor with other cats, and that macarodonts also have a common ancestor with panthers and felines.
It's about
because there's 3 different distinctions for cats, and the nymphorids also are related to cats.
It feels awkward
with a common ancestor.
Maybe rude,
and
but I don't
we
think
get to further down. We also have viverids included, and then we also have canids, which are the dogs, the bears, the weasels, the seals. All of these are genetically linked. It's not just lines on paper. And if you think that phylogenetics is just drawing lines on paper, then yeah, we need to have a long talk, and this is it. So, at what point could you show me 2 different created kinds that don't share a common ancestor?
Okay.
Yeah,
I think the created kind, let's take the pine tree leopard example here, since we're on that. You believe they had a common ancestor. I do not. I think pine trees, I don't know how many varieties, I didn't look it up. How many pine trees are there? A lot.
But of course,
the loblolly, the longleaf,
something that's really
1,000 varieties
very
of pine
closely
trees.
related.
Now, whether they had a common ancestor or not is interesting. I don't know, but let's assume that they did. If we can get 1,000 varieties of pine trees from an original pine tree,
it's really easy to be like
that
pine
is
trees.
Not evidence that a pine tree and a leopard are related.
But it's really hard to say something like, which he won't admit to, something like leopards and panthers are different kinds. He might not believe that they are. He might think they're all the cat kind. But something that specific would be very difficult for him. Maybe he'd say like dogs and cats are different kinds. Honestly, it's to the point where like that should be pretty reasonable for a creationist to commit to, but they're hyper allergic to saying something that they can be held to later.
There's evidence, however, that all of these conifers had a common ancestor, is it not?
I agree. They probably did.
So can you find me, same question, repeating the same question again, which you clearly you have demonstrated you do not understand the question, so I'm phrasing it again.
Okay.
I want you to give me not just another description of a clade, which you mistakenly refer to as a kind. No, that's not what a kind is. That's a clade. A kind is where the clade begins with a special creation. Can you give me 2 special creations that science would consider to be in the same parent category?
Probably the 4 different, I don't know if I had my next picture here shows the 4 different species of skunks, because this picture showed a skunk and a leopard as being related.
Yes, because skunks are mustelids, which were a subset of Canoidea.
This is one of those rare instances. Like, you don't jump into it. Let him talk. He almost gave an answer. If he wants to say skunks and leopards, that is an attempt. Like, maybe you can talk about whether that meets the phylogeny challenge or what the problem with it is, or so on and so forth. But you were doing so good, man. Just it was very possible for him that he was about to commit to something, but you cut him off.
And then your panthers, again, a subset of Phyloidea, both within order Carnivora. So sure. Are you suggesting then that God created skunks but did not create any of the other weasels around it, that all other mustelids, or did he create a common ancestor of mustelids? And then we have to look at the common ancestor of mustelids along with the other related groups within Canoidea. Is a skunk your created kind, or is mustelid your created kind? Which is it?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah,
I think this textbook shows the otter also is in here.
It's like you seem to know very little about
related. There are 13
theory
varieties
you think
of
explains
otters, And they have
I
line
gave you a hint that you needed to look up the phylogeny challenge before you address this, and you don't even know what the phylogeny challenge is.
Maybe that's what you should. Maybe. So I think it's a good idea to keep pressing him on this same question, the phylogeny challenge. Answer this challenge, this question phrased differently. That's a good idea. Maybe it would have been good also to hammer in. I was like, wow, you really say something like, wow, you seem to know very little about this thing that you argue for and claim explains all forms of life. He'd probably back up to, yeah, but I don't want mine taught at taxpayer expense or whatever. But I don't know, maybe saying out loud for the people who like him, yeah, it's wild how little you say you know, and yet you think it's absolutely true. You think you can claim the truth of it despite knowing so little about it yourself.
As I've clearly demonstrated, is drawing lines on paper.
Challenge.
Yeah, Ken, let's try to clarify.
This is where it's like angry atheist stuff again. It's like I understand. It's hard not to get worked up talking to someone like this.
Phylogeny challenge is, which is something he has issued, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, dealing with the original kinds for what would be the beginning of a clade or the creationist point of view along those lines.
Yeah, I set it up so that most people who visit my channel would see the phylogeny challenge video first thing.
Mm-hmm. Sure. You want to know what the original created kinds were and how that is distinguished from the other created kinds, and what prevents them from being connected. Is that
no? The second part of the question is irrelevant.
Yeah, okay.
Sure. Yeah. If you can show me created kinds, then it wouldn't matter how that clade diversifies after that, or the number of subset clades within that, because you can have new clades erupt within those old clades, and they're still going to belong to the parent clade that they always were. And the same goes through entire evolutionary phylogenies, every one of them. They remain belonging to every ancestral category that their ancestors ever did. There was never became a non-dog. That argument is invalid. So show me two created kinds that science would consider within the same parental clade.
Very good. Ask the same question
if they
again.
never became something other than their parents.
Because of the law of monophily that I just described.
It's
an evolutionary law.
So if there was something then that was the ancestor of pine trees and elephants where we started this conversation, obviously something happened. And this is, nobody's ever observed this. See, science, I guess my definition of science is very different than yours. Science is things we observe, study, test, and demonstrate.
And that is exactly my definition as well.
Okay, then so far every farmer,
and we can observe, study, test, demonstrate that the most primitive and simplest plants are in fact single cell.
Right, like what I mean by doesn't want to demonstrate anything is like, for real, you believe that there are kinds and not whatever other categorizations that actual scientists will use. You say there are kinds, but you can't even demonstrate that there are kinds or what one is. You don't want to demonstrate anything. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously, again, I feel like I'm taking too seriously someone who's obviously just lying, but gotta.
And that they
what
are
else do I have? What else can I do, right?
And do you think?
And if we just teach the facts, if we teach the observable, testable, verifiable facts about this, then we come up with what Linnaeus came up with when he discovered a tree of life that should not exist. He was a creationist. He had no idea, no concept of evolution. In his time, species were immutable.
Linnaeus,
you couldn't derive a new
Linnaean
species. And
taxonomy,
yet he was seeing a tree such as you're currently describing. You don't realize it's cladistics that you're talking about, but that's what it is. He didn't have a concept of that, and he couldn't explain it. That's why he turned to the scientific community and challenged them to explain why is he seeing this.
So did Linnaeus think that pine trees and elephants were related?
No.
Again, just wants
he was
to
a creationist,
back to his.
But
he's also trying to force a point, but that point
people were the
is
same
nonsense,
thing,
and he has nowhere to go with it.
And he challenged.
The only thing he has is, doesn't that seem ridiculous? Then why, if that's all you have, why do you keep pushing it? Especially because he's gotten an answer. There's a very big difference between repeatedly pushing a disingenuous question to which you've gotten an answer, as opposed to repeatedly asking a good faith question that your opponent refuses to answer.
The scientific community to find him a generic difference that accords to the laws of cladistic, or not cladistics, of taxonomy. And they couldn't. So they arbitrarily created a class of Pongo, just to ease their own conscience about it. But then, of course, in the last 20 years or so, genetics has confirmed that there is no such thing as a separate family for the non-human apes. We are still apes.
Okay, I think it was dictionary.com or whatever, the word definition of cladistic, since you're trying to equate that with kinds. A method of classification.
I'm not. I want to clarify. You are
Kent
the one
is now learning what clades are.
I am distinguished. No, yes. You are using the word. You're using the word kind to describe clades, and you are habitually avoiding the actual definition. A kind would be a clade that begins with a special creation. I distinguish these. You're the one equating them. Do not accuse me of making your mistake.
Well, let me just read you the dictionary definition of cladistic.
Just completely ignore it.
All
right, I'm going to read from the dictionary now.
Of animals and plants according to the proportion of measurable characteristics that they have in common. It is assumed that the higher the proportion of characteristics the two organisms share, the more recently they diverged from a common ancestor.
Oh God, the word assumes.
So cladistic
that would not be a scientific definition. I can help you with that. The scientific definition is a classification, as I previously described, with all of the criteria that each of these groups should have. You have to make a total tally of everything that is included within that group before you decide whether something else belongs there. But the key word, which is not in your layman's dictionary, is that the cladistics is a classification that includes all its descendants. It doesn't make special exceptions for certain ones. For example, the clade animal,
this is not
which is formerly known as metazoa, is multicellular eukaryotes with an
I think Aaron can't help
the simplest definition. That's what an animal is.
Some sort of educational information in these conversations,
right?
I definitely have an internal digestive tract. Yes, sir, I do.
Yes, and you're a multicellular eukaryote. So, by definition, then you are an animal. So there was no point in your evolutionary ancestry that an animal gave birth to a non-animal. Because of the law of monophyly, you are still an animal, and you always will be.
But hold it, an elephant in a pine tree, something happened. One's no longer an animal.
Notice how he phrases that, right? It's not that one's an animal and one's plant. It's one's no longer an animal, as if pine trees at one point used to be animals. It's no, both are descendants from something that was at that point neither animal nor plant yet.
Clarify this, because I think you guys are talking past each other, and I think Aaron's asked this multiple times, and I want to make sure that everybody gets equal time on this. So let's.
I like the lip service to equal time. No, you don't. And don't say it, because no, you don't, and it's not helpful or valuable to have equal time.
Specifically, towards Kent's kind definitions, what I think we need to isolate is that all the things you've talked about, the pine tree and mammals, are still eukaryotic, right? They're different kinds of eukaryotes. Right, but they're still eukaryotic, and they came from something in evolutionary theory that was non-eukaryotic at one point, right? They have a shared common ancestry.
We don't even have to get into the genetics of the fossil record at this point. I mean, there's or embryology or any of the other things that confirm phylogenetics. We're just looking at the simple characters. We're looking at what Carolus Linnaeus would look at. So the commonality between the pine tree and the elephant is that they're eukaryotes.
Right.
Neither one started from an animal. Being a eukaryote doesn't mean animal, so it means it's referring to a cell that has a nucleus, right? And so that never changed. Now, at some later point after the division between plants on one side and the animals on the other, then we have this. But then we have many further divisions before we get to trees, and then conifers, and then pine trees. Just like we have many further divisions before we get to eutherian mammals and elephants.
I feel like. I feel a little weird just pausing in the middle of this, but also just going on without doing too much contribution. I think what my plan is, and I'll pause it here just to talk about it, is I think what I'll do is I'll go till 6. I can't go too much longer because I do have other things I have to do in my day. So I think we'll go until there, see how much we get through. At the end there, I'll ask if you feel like there's more to go over, because we do really just yet Kent refusing to answer this same question for about another hour. If we want to go over it more, then I'll finish on Monday before getting into the follow-up video. Alternatively, we can just cut it and get into the alternative video on Monday. But we'll see how we feel about that. I'll go until 6, and then we'll stop.
Dolphins and so forth.
Okay, so can you address that specifically for the audience, please? Because you do agree that trees and animals are all eukaryotic, right, Kent?
Correct. Well, they all have a cell with a nucleus. That is correct.
Sure.
plant cells and animal cells. They're very different in many other ways, but yes, they both have a nucleus. So that proves we're related. So because we both are eukaryotes, therefore elephants and pine trees are related. I'm just completely baffled at how a grown person could believe that.
I just mentioned that there are other categories that we can use. We're only right now looking at Linnaean characteristics. Sure. We haven't got into genetics or embryology or the fossil record or any of that. We're just looking at the characteristics right now.
Okay,
so I would say we have to consider. We want to make sure that we don't adopt a belief at the onset, because of course that would be dishonest. And it would be dishonest to throw out any evidence that flies against whatever belief you want to adopt at the onset. So we're better off both not having a belief to start with.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start
there, right?
And just look at the facts and the possibilities.
Okay, let's look at the facts. Yeah. Pine trees are made up of cells, all of which, originally, the ones that are still living anyway, have a nucleus. The dead ones, of course, the internal tree no longer has that. But yes, and elephants are made up of cells, and they have nucleus. Okay. I could look at that and say, this proves we have a common designer, because this system works really good.
You don't have to go that far. You don't even have to. You can construct an entire tree of life, as Linnaeus did, without making that assumption. And you still come to the same inescapable
This is a little bit of a distraction.
You could also
from Kent, because being held too much, like, he can only evade so much while on the same subject. So he wants to say, like, so he's bringing in the designer thing to try to talk about something else. Instead, bring it to discussion of creation and not the specifics of kinds. Instead, to say, oh look, there's a god, and then yada yada, etc. It's a bit of a distraction, just so he doesn't have to answer anymore. Like, with the idea that, Arendt in particular, because he's an atheist, but like anyone who would support evolution would have the same issue of like, no, it's not necessary, it's not relevant, and will push back on the designer aspect. Yeah, it's just another sneaky debate tactic, as it were.
Tree of life, and say, wow, look at the designer gave all this stuff the ability to reproduce.
Then again,
varieties.
You're making an assumption that is unjustified.
Right.
We have to look at possibilities as well. Okay. So in order to say, and I know that you know that not everything is possible, because
you've said many times because now
you don't understand that you think are impossible. So you know that we can't just say that anything is possible. You know that there's a limit, that there are things that are not possible. So we have to look at, before we can say that something is.
Oh, I almost forgot. Another thing that Kent believes, he says he thinks that he's like, lizards don't stop growing throughout their whole life. So he thinks dinosaurs are just lizards that lived a really long time and got really big. I'm not joking. That's like, maybe he doesn't believe it, right? He's obviously willing to lie about literally anything, but that's something he claims to believe. Absolutely wild. Just like, it's just like the little lizard you see in your backyard. If it lived long enough, it would become a triceratops or whatever else.
It's possible. We have to verify that the possibility exists. There has to be a precedent or a parallel or a verified phenomenon to indicate that such possibility exists. Now, we know that evolution happens. We've seen how it happens. We know various different aspects about it. We know quite a lot, actually, about the evolutionary process and the evolutionary history and so forth. And so we know that these things occur. They're observable, demonstrable, verifiable, repeatable directly.
I feel like sometimes Arendt
do we have a possibility?
I would be unable to
magic imaginary friend using a conjuration spell.
And there it is. While I agree with the description, magic imaginary friend using a conjuration spell, he's fallen a little bit for the like, oh, we're gonna talk about a creator now. But we will eventually come back to pushing the phylogeny challenge again. In effect, it has worked for Kent to distract in this way.
You have already said several things which I would have to disagree with. We do not know that evolution happens by my definition.
Okay, so
of evolution.
you're saying that
that's another distraction, right? Now we're distracting from the discussion.
Let him finish out his answer.
Trying to get as far as possible.
In your mind, you know evolution happens. In my mind, I have a different definition of that. I think variations happen within the same kind, but they're limited to that kind.
Yeah,
but there's no definition of kind.
I don't think evolution happens. I just think speciation is the thing that occurs.
What we've been talking about for the last half hour is trying to get you to define a kind as distinguished from a clade. Now, I've given the definition, and I've called you to give examples of that, and you failed to do so. What you have instead done was deny the very definition of evolution as being a fact. You would agree, and you have described already how you accept certain aspects of evolution, and not just change within a species. You're talking about changes between species, which means you accept macroevolution as well. I know you defined it as something else because you have to use equivocation. But just because you use the wrong definitions doesn't mean that your definitions are right.
Things that
it means the scientific community has established what these definitions are, and you don't get to change them just for your audience.
And you don't get to put words in my mouth. I do not believe in macroevolution. By my definition.
But you described what you described that you accept. What you said you accept meets the definition that scientists give for what macroevolution is. Microevolution is variation within a species. Macroevolution is variation between species, and this includes speciation, and you accept that speciation happens. So you accept that by definition, the actual, real definition, and not the false one you made up, that you accept what is actually really defined as macroevolution.
Adhering to those definitions feels really important to RN. There's a part of me that just goes like, okay, but what he says when he means that is different, right? And so it does seem like, oh, you're just putting words in my mouth. You're just being dishonest, and he gets to paint you in this way. This is part of why I wonder if it would have been effective to referring to the eukaryote kind, because that's terms he can operate in, and he can't just reject because you're using words differently, you're putting words in his mouth or whatever. In the same way here, you might just say like, you might say, okay, you admit to like speciation or whatever, something he has agreed to. But if you say, oh, you believe in macroevolution, he can disagree because what he means by that is not what the word means in a scientific context.
Let's make sure that Ken has equal time here, Arn, if we can.
That would be wonderful.
I want to make sure Ken.
Okay.
Please, we're trying to make sure you have equal time. But
I think he keeps saying that because the agreement to come on, he can't probably insisted on equal time being a thing. He's really big on that because he probably knows that he can lie more in 10 minutes than someone can debunk in 10 minutes. Arn, in fact, had a video series after this interaction where he went through and like started debunking some of the things that Kent was saying. It was like, look, it takes like 20 minutes to debunk one sentence sometimes. It's just impossible in the same amount of time to counter that many lies. As it turns out, it's just like an unfortunate fact of the world that lies take less time to say than they take to be debunked.
We're talking about the same things, and I understand both your guys' positions. I've had many conversations with both of you gentlemen. Arn is explaining it from a very scientific and precise way of looking at it. And what he's asking you is for you to define your terms in a way that is from a creationist point of view, and they don't mesh. And I think that's why we're having a communication failure here. When you're talking about speciation, Kent, what do you mean by macroevolution? What do you mean by speciation? How much of it do you accept? Is that something along the lines of what you want to know, Arn?
These are some reasonable questions in that they make Kent answer a question.
I don't think anybody's ever given a really hard definition of species. Is a dog and a wolf a different species, yet they're the same kind of animal?
Well,
is a dog and a coyote and a wolf, they're different species?
This is the kind of thing where like I'm a little surprised that his followers don't balk at this a little bit, because any discussion of this I've ever heard has at the very least what seems like a hard definition of species, right? It's about interbreeding, the ability to interbreed. We can even look it up. I think even a lay definition of species would be pretty clear. A group of living organisms consisting of similar individuals capable of exchanging genes or interbreeding. Oh yeah, we have looked this up before. Like this should be at least clear enough for him of like, well, I guess maybe there is that confusion when he talks about wolves and dogs, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It seems like a little weird that he would think that definition
Lupus canis domesticus, but
isn't clear.
They're the same kind. So yes, I do accept that speciation happens, but who is getting, like they decided there's a new species of finch on the Galapagos Islands now, because one flew over to a different island and crossbred with a different variety of finch.
I guess he has to do this to undermine scientific knowledge and understanding. Oh, so you don't even know what a species is. Some group
of scientists decide to call that a new species,
you just decided
that is not evidence
it's a very
for evolution.
Arbitrary.
That's wishful thinking. That's SpongeBob imagination stuff. I agree. Variations happen, And I agree, new species could be created if somebody wants to call that a new species.
He won't ever like new species could be created. I'll never acknowledge it, but it's possible. It's just like the ability for him to agree in concept, so he doesn't seem like an absolute lunatic, but be able to reject when it becomes specific, so that he can dance away from anything that is an actual challenge to the things he says he believes.
I don't know if the 200 species of squirrels are I think
remember he was holding to that earlier. Now he's like, no,
I think
they're
the
probably
word species is too flexible. I think the biblical word kind, able to bring forth.
Species is too flexible, but kind is serious, is specific enough. You can't even answer what these kinds are, or give a specific example of a kind as distinct from another kind and where that begins. And as I mentioned earlier, locusts or bats are both the bird kind and the same kind as locusts. Yeah, if whales are the fish kind, none of this is rigorous in any way. But you have to say the line so that the people who believe him will be like, yeah, see, he's proving his point.
So those 200 species of squirrels can probably bring forth babies. The squirrel and the pine tree cannot. Points. They're different kinds. Squirrel and an elephant cannot. Whether squirrel and chipmunk, I don't know. That's a good question. I'll do some research on that, Aaron. I'll get back with you.
He won't.
I don't
right?
know
Like
about
he's just going to say it, so it seems like he does
in the same
any sort of scientific
kind or not.
investigation.
Good question. I will definitely
work
on that.
But if he did, he would have
answers.
But
I think I could demonstrate that a squirrel and a pine tree are not the same kind. And if you choose to believe they got a common ancestor, that is your religion. There's no evidence for that. No evidence at all. That's a religion you believe in, and that's fine. This is America. You can have any religion you want, but you should admit it's a religion and quit calling it science. That's not science.
So the evidence that we have, both genetic and character-based, that we have these commonalities, and in addition to what we've seen in the fossil record, these are all the facts. And I think you would even agree with this definition of evidence that it is a body of objectively verifiable facts, which are either exclusively, they're positively indicative of or exclusively concordant with one available position over any other. And these would confirm these beyond reasonable doubt.
What's a little unfortunate is that a lot of the evidence for evolution is too complicated and too much to explain in a short period of time for it to really work. This is one of the reasons why debates are not great as methods of disseminating true information. It's a lecture would be better yet would be like a scientific paper or whatever else. You're not going to be able to do it in the context of a debate, which is something the creationists often use to their advantage. They'll where's your evidence? Can't you prove it? But they won't understand the evidence they're presented. They won't accept it, and it's often only really viable to present in an opening statement. There's a debate between Gutsy Gibbon and Kent Hovind where she tries to do that. And so it's not possible to do in a conversation like this. He'd have to go on for quite a few minutes before you demonstrated anything that would show evolution, because it's complicated. It's not so simple that a 5-year-old can intuitively understand it. And as it turns out, there are things about the world that are too complicated and too complex for a 5-year-old to intuitively understand. That doesn't make them not true.
Would you accept that that is the definition of evidence, or that is a working definition for the purpose of this discussion?
Well, yes, determining what a fact is. You mentioned that the genetic commonality, I think it's a fact, but whether that proves a common ancestor or common creator is the question. And you mentioned the fossil record.
You're interrupting him actually at this right now.
Great.
So hang on, Aaron. Well, I promise we'll get back to you. But go ahead, Ken. I want you to finish your statements, because I have been noticing both of you have been interrupting a little bit. So to be fair,
a little bit.
Ken, finish what you're saying.
Yeah,
and then let Aaron
just
respond,
a smidge.
Please.
Just a bit. Maybe he
knows.
knows.
Several times he has mentioned that the fossil record is somehow evidence to support his theory that they have a common ancestor. I would contend there is no such thing as a fossil record. There are bones in the dirt indicating they died.
Right. This is again I saw a footprint. That doesn't mean that someone walked here. How do you know it didn't just naturally form? So this is the equivalent. We just see bones in the dirt. We can't learn anything from that. Of course we can. And if we couldn't, most of the things that we do know wouldn't be knowable.
Why would you think a bone from the dirt could do something which no animal today could do, which is produce something? If you find squirrel fossils in the dirt, you're going to say, this is a squirrel, and it produced squirrels. That's all they produce today. But yet you think a bone in the dirt is capable of doing something no animal today can do.
No, he believes
which is
that
produce
it's
something other than its fundamentally
capable of what
fifth
every
grade
animal
or
is able to
5-year-old
do,
level kind of animal.
Have offspring.
Once again, because of the law of monophyly, I clearly do not believe that anything ever becomes not what its ancestors were. I've explained this repeatedly. So I do not believe that. Hybridization, by the way, a finch crossing over to another island and then hybridizing with other finches is not speciation. It can be, but
he's getting distracted by the irrelevant thing.
Very, very limited. The vast majority of speciation.
I hope this is helpful to see how people will distract from arguments when they're trying to run from a topic and trying to be dishonest. Of like, he'll mention the finch thing because you don't want to leave it alone. But if you talk about it, now we're off subject again. Notice how far we are from the phylogeny challenge. Kent has very effectively gotten the topic away from the thing he was being pressed on and onto other things he can grandstand about or lie about or make himself look good or just talk without meaning about.
Events are just build-ups of genetic diversity. We have 4 different types of speciation that are now logged, and hybridization doesn't even account for any of these 4. So these are just build-ups of genetic diversity in different isolated groups, or even emerging within a same group.
Okay, well, let me ask you a simple question then. Does this buildup of genetic diversity have any limits?
What limits would you propose? What limits might you be thinking of?
More productive, I guess.
Let's take limits on size as an example. Is there any do you believe there's a limit to the size of dogs? Is it possible for dogs to ever become as big as a blue whale? There are animals as big as a blue whale, like the blue whale. So is it possible for an animal? Is there a limit on size? Could you get a dog as big as Texas?
Feels relevant to him.
Godzilla I know is not possible, for example.
Very good, very good. So there are limits to this variation.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay. Now, of course, the distinction between biological limits and limits of physics are being assumed to be the same here. It's not that it's not that Godzilla is impossible because there's no way for a creature to grow to biologically be, I don't know, have the biology to grow that large. There used to be animals that, I don't know about that large, but at the very least very large. But part of what makes it difficult is things like physics. If your head is too big, then your neck can't support it and you won't last very long, for example. Or if you weigh too much, it requires too much energy to move around and maybe you can't get that much nutrition. There are so many things that factor into this. Large animals are often the sea because buoyancy makes the weight problem less of an issue. This is not an issue of biology, it's an issue of physics, but he's conflating the two so you can be like, okay, so if there are limits at all, then that means it should be the limits I'm suggesting are also reasonable when they're not.
There are what you're telling me is that there are structural limits imposed by gravity, but not actually by biodiversity.
He does.
So there's no limit to biodiversity that you've yet given, only structural limitations according to physics, perhaps.
Well, no, okay. Well,
also,
correct.
This is from the guy who thinks lizards could grow large enough to be dinosaurs if they lived long.
Because of structural difficulties, when they exceed 200 pounds, they are beyond their ability to withstand to grow any larger because of the structure they already have. They have to adapt a more improved structure in order to exceed that size.
That said,
and the same thing goes with the reason the dinosaurs
can grow to be larger in subsequent generations, and this is something that is observable even from an intuitive 5-year-old's perspective. I, for example, am taller than my dad. Boom, did it. Larger than my predecessor. Like, this is not an absurd idea, but he wants to draw to like the extremes so that okay, there are limits. Oh, therefore my limit is just as reasonable, but it's not. This is one of those. Oh, we talked about this a little. It's like kind of the reverse of guilt by association. It's more like approval by association, because they're both limits, therefore they're both reasonable. It's like, no, that's not true at all.
Were so big was because they had a system already built in that allowed that to happen without a backlash. They had avian respiration, so they had hollow bones that they could breathe through, which made them far more energetic and powerful than we are. So that dinosaurs and mammals of equal mass, the dinosaur will excel because it'll be lighter and faster and stronger.
Well, you said the dog is limited.
This reminds me a little bit of another thing that creationists like to misunderstand is survival of the fittest. Oh, but this thing is slower than that thing. Isn't that less fit? They have this idea of like objective good, an objective quality of like it's always better to be stronger or bigger or whatever. But no, of course, like fittest is what fits its environment best. Sometimes being smaller means that you require less food to survive, and that can be an advantage in an environment where food is scarce, for example. I don't know if I don't remember if it comes up here, but it's just something I remember creationists like to misunderstand constantly.
Can't become as big as an elephant. There are animals as big as an elephant. It's called an elephant.
There are animals that are as big as an elephant, but they have to, as I just said, and I'm going to have to repeat again, the dog would then have to have a new adaptation to account for the larger size, because we also know
theoretically be possible.
Come from dogs. Bears they don't come from dogs. They come from the common ancestor. But bears are genetically linked to dogs, and bears have excessive size. They don't have the digigrade gait and the hyper speed that dogs have, different derivations from the commonality.
Well, in your
they're not. It's not
again
a religion,
another distraction. Oh, he's been shown wrrong. Talk about something else. I'll say religion because I know it's.
It doesn't require belief. It doesn't teach belief. It discourages belief in favor of critical analysis and peer review.
Okay, well, Aaron, bears produce bears, dogs produce dogs. You say they came from a common ancestor. That is a belief. We never observed that.
Why is it a belief to see a genetic link? If you've got evidence that shows the genetics are there, that dogs and bears and seals and mustelids are all canoidian carnivores, and they're all genetically linked. If you can do a parental test using the genetics, the same as you say in Maury Povich, you are the father. We show the genetic link. There is the evidence, not faith like you have, not just going on a book of old fables like you have. We have actual genetic evidence to confirm this.
So you have genetic evidence that a dog and a bear are related. And what is that evidence exactly? Because they have similar DNA?
Told you.
No, you didn't. You said, you said there's the word genetics is not, I want to be specific.
Right, now he's demanding a level of specificity and evidence that wouldn't be possible.
You are the father of the bear and the dog. What exactly would make you think?
Even if it were, by the way, Arn might not have that specific example to hand, right? But this is what disingenuous source type demands look like. Not every request for a source is necessarily bad faith or dishonest, but this clearly, right? Because one, he'd have to have it to hand for this specific example. Two, it would have to be presentable in a short period of time. And three, it would then have to clear the condition of Kent Hovind, of all people, accepting it, which he won't. If I remember correctly, I don't remember if it was Kent Hovind or another person, but there was some creationist who offered like $100,000 or $1 million prize for someone who could demonstrate the proof of evolution to him. And it turns out that the people who were going to decide whether they had met the condition were also creationists, and they were his buddies. Of like, oh, okay, well, then yeah, you can claim it's never been, that prize has never been claimed because there is no evidence you will accept. That's not a problem of the evidence, it's the problem of the reviewer.
What part of the DNA structure? Is it the number of chromosomes? Is it the length of the chromosomes? Is it the arrangement of CATG? Exactly what is this evidence that you're saying, you're claiming is evidence for this ancestor?
This would be among things like the fact that humans have a huge amount of
ancestor of dog
junk,
and wolf,
monkey
or dog
DNA
and bear.
I explained this in a series I explained this in a video called
Caniform
Carnivore Cladogram Construction.
This is way
I like alliteration. I can't help it. And there's a backup to this that also covers the cat side of the family tree. And these are in a series of videos, a five video series called Falsifying Phylogeny, which explains a number of other evolutionary principles, including the evolutionary laws that I just mentioned.
You were at the very least demonstrating
there is an answer. Give me a 2-minute summary here. What is your reason?
It is, as I just explained, and I'm repeating the explanation again. It's just like doing a parental test where you're matching the commonality to see whether this person is the father or that person is the father. You're just extrapolating further back.
This is good to note that this is the kind of thing we do constantly. This is not novel and used exclusively in genetics to determine ancestry. The same tools that we use for parental tests that works and Kent, I assume, would accept it are how we determine how species are related further back than literal children of a specific person.
And I'll ask you again. Maybe you'll get it this time. What exactly are you looking at?
But of course, this is an answer that a question
I answered twice. I will answer a third time. Maybe you will be the one to get it this time, as I had it since the beginning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we are just like a parental paternity test, where you're using a genetic matchup, right? Codon for codon, right? You're looking for the commonality between these genetic lines, genetic lineages. You're also looking at wherever they're applicable.
Now, this is in part why this was always going to not work. This is going to be over the head of most people, especially people who believe Kent. So now, okay, you said a bunch of words, but they can just write it off as like, okay, well, I don't understand it, so it doesn't actually prove it. You haven't proven it. You just said things I don't get.
ERVs and such. Whatever, I can't remember the other term. Whatever other commonalities take factor in genetic comparison. You're doing a genome sequence comparison to identify the ancestry, just like you would trace whether you are Danish in ancestry or Jamaican or what have you. It's the same concept.
So you're saying someone did a genome sequencing of a dog and a bear and found out that they have a common ancestor based on
Not just
ERVs?
someone, lots of people.
Now,
because the thing about science is that it's also
we're going
to
get to the next
reviewed, which
one
means
of the
somebody
other problems
does
I laid
these
out
tests and say, okay, I did these tests, and then other people have to go back and duplicate those tests and confirm that they get similar results, or they can confirm that this is what actually happens.
Unfortunately, that's not...
you mentioned we should start with no belief whatsoever and just look at the evidence. Let's assume that we do study the bear and the dog and find out they have similar ERVs, they have similar genetic sequences. What then would you conclude from that? Would you consider the possibility that maybe the same author wrote the code?
There it is. And that's what I mean. You're never going to be able to present something to someone like Kent that he will accept, or he'll misconstrue like that it supports his point. Remember, the problem with it, I guess I should lay out why Kent is wrong in this assumption, is that because it is an assumption. You are suggesting the existence of an actor we don't have evidence for, except for the book you believe in, that might not be necessary for proving it for an explanation here, because as it turns out, evolution explains things much better as well. You're assuming also that certain attributes of this actor and what they would be like. There's a lot of assumptions built into this that are not necessary nor corroborated. Even if you wanted to say that it is necessary, you haven't demonstrated the possibility that this actor could exist, let alone that they did this thing. There's just so many built-on assumptions, and this is why from the outset Aaron wanted Kent to... Well, he was hoping Kent would agree to, but he knew, obviously. Well, I shouldn't speak for him. He probably would have liked if Kent agreed to coming in with no assumptions and no prior beliefs, but obviously, Kent would never agree to that. And this is why it was important to say that, because now, when he says something like this, it's clear how many assumptions are built into the idea of no, remember, Kent isn't saying it's another possibility. He's saying it can't be common ancestry, and it must be a common designer. But that only works if you assume that that's possible, and so on and so forth. All these things I've already mentioned you assume, and probably several others that I've missed.
The possibility, key word. Once again, I repeat, and I have to do that a lot here, that in order to establish whether there is a possibility, we have to show a precedent or a parallel or a verified phenomenon indicating that that possibility exists. And we have had, by your own admission, we have had speciation occur. We have seen evolution happening in real time, not just in the fossil record, but also in the lab, live. So we know
this is
it
something
occurs.
That creationists
and then we
can't
look at the
contend with.
characters of the simple physical characteristics.
Trying to, like,
I
don't know. I'm surprised he didn't try to cut in
there. You look between the description of bears and of dogs, and then we look in the fossil record. We also find bear dogs and dog bears. Literally, seriously. We find bear dogs and dog bears, both. And then we have common ancestors basal to each that would, their physiology looks a little bit more like a wolverine. But basically it's the common ancestor where it's still plantigrade, still like a dog, or it's still plantigrade like a bear, but still has a long tail like a dog.
One thing I do like about
so we have a number of different
you always learn
something. Of different
that's pretty neat, right?
Of evidence, different bodies of evidence that all concord with each other. And you want me to consider the possibility, as yet unestablished, that a magic imaginary man went poof.
All right, so let's try to get this a little back on track a little bit. So Arn, you're saying there's a consilience of all these different branches of not just genetics, not just codons, not just ERVs, but comparative homologies and anatomy and a whole bunch of
different other things. This is where it's over most people's heads.
And Kent's basically saying, forget all that. There's a probability or possibility that it could be a common designer. That's
exactly.
Basically
so
the
in the description where he asked for my two items of evidence for or my two best examples of evidence for evolution. I gave phylogenetics, which I've been trying to explain, and he's actually been explaining, but he doesn't understand that is what he's explaining. And then the other thing, which is that we actually know things to be true, demonstrably, verifiably true about evolution, where nobody knows anything at all about any magic imaginary designer. There is literally no possibility to consider, because he can't even show me a kind, which would have to be the most basic thing any creationist should cough up.
I do like these bringing it back to that, but notice how much time we spent.
If you want to talk about all animals being created, you'd have to show me which ones are the ones that are created. If you're going to accept that some degree of phylogeny applies, where's the cutoff point? That's what I'm asking. That's what the phylogeny.
Show me a kind. Show me where the borders are for anything. Bring it back.
Give him equal time on this. So Ken, he's kind of asking you, what was the original kind as compared to what we know to be speciation events? So you're agreeing that speciation occurs. So can you differentiate between for us what we know to be speciation, because you agree speciation occurs, to the original created kinds that were not derivated from some kind of original other species? So what are the
honest, I'm not even
kinds
sure
that you're suggesting exist?
They can't understand what's being asked of him.
Evidences that
but in as much as he does, he is,
and we'll give you plenty of time to speak
pretty
on this.
clearly unwilling to answer, because he knows.
Thank you. I think I've answered it 5 or 6 times, but
you haven't.
If they're able to bring forth, according to Genesis chapter 1, they're the same kind. Now, have they diversified? He keeps mixing the word species and kind. I don't use that word species very often because it's a flexible term. I think a dog and a wolf are different species, as I mentioned, yet they're the same kind of animal.
Things, now, given what we've talked about before, I think most of what he just said in the last couple of sentences should be things I don't have to argue against. Given what we've already talked about, notice how many lies were in just those couple sentences, and how long it would take to deconstruct all of it. It's truly impressive, his aptitude at lying.
100 species of squirrels, they're probably the same kind of animal. There are 1,100 species of bats. They're probably the same kind of animal, called a bat. But if you want to look at the similarities, I have in front of me an article from, let's see, where was this published? Farm and Garden magazine, Monday, August 15, 2005. About they deciphered the DNA
I guess
of
who am I
rice,
to talk about blathering, right?
And they said fruit flies have 13,600 genes in their DNA code. The humans have 20 to 25,000 genes. Rice has 37,544, and maize has 50,000. So we could make a phylogenetic tree, and if we live long enough, we're all going to be turned into maize, and the cows can eat us here. So I think the biblical is obvious.
So a couple of things that are new and unique. One of them is, well, I guess isn't new. This is back to the how do I want to put it? The implication that the phylogeny is arbitrary and we do it for whatever, we just felt like doing it this way, and that's why it's like that, and not that there are reasons behind it. But one thing that is new is, notice he was saying oh, maize has all these genes as compared to cows, which have less genes or whatever, and so we'll eventually all be maize. This idea that more is always better, that this is that misunderstanding of survival of the fittest, is having more genes is better than having fewer genes. Therefore, because also another misunderstanding that evolution is always, that is forward, we are progressing towards better things. It's not. It's just things change into the next thing. It's not. There's no like objective standard of better, but there's this assumption of like, oh, you'll get better and you'll become maize. And it's truly remarkable the number of things Kant has to misunderstand to take the positions that he does.
Is that rice and humans and flies are different kinds. And there's a place called baraminology.com, from the Hebrew word baramin, about kind, that is so far as I think they've said there are probably about 7 or 8.
Dare we venture to baraminology.com? Oh no, I can't stop myself. Oh, it's happening. Oh god. Oh. I don't know. Let's baraminology. Let's just Google baraminology, and apparently that's a little questionable source there. Created kinds, baraminology. Answers in Genesis. Ooh, we gotta. All right. What the hell is baraminology? According to their kind. Oh, so the like attempt at classifying life in like taxonomy based on kinds. It's weird that this is one of the first things. Is this a rabbit hole I want to go down? I don't know if this is a rabbit hole I want to go. Let's see. All right, let's see if they give anything like specific. Okay, this is just saying what the thing is, but I want to give me something that's like actually a description. Like, are there any knowledge claims that you want to throw out here? Categories of creatures has a citation. Footnote 2. See the footnotes. 2. All right, we got examples here. All right, we're following the rabbit hole a little bit. Just get some excitement in. All right. D.A. Robinson, Kavanaugh. Okay. Get some excitement at the end of the stream. Oh, it's interesting. I can't really find this article. Well, if we can't find it, then we're not going to go down the rabbit hole. But it'd be fun to end the stream with something interesting, right? Oh, maybe? For a description, this seems way over my head and very much not what I'm looking for. BDIST. I don't know what that is. All right. Rabbit hole. Can't find my way in.
Kinds of animals on land that breathe air. This would not include insects or fish that didn't have to go on the ark. About 7,000 kinds of animals probably went on Noah's Ark. Some say even less than that.
Okay, he's saying 7,000 kinds.
Let's just pick that number and say 7,000 to 8,000 is a reasonable number of
Tell
kinds.
me what one of those are.
Of original animals that had to come off the ark. A fish would do just fine in the flood.
What the first one of it was.
But I think that everybody should recognize that they're limited. I don't know exactly where the limit is, but we talked about the dog. Can they become as big as an elephant? No, but there are elephants that are as big as an elephant. And they certainly can't become as big as Texas. So certainly there are limits to the variations within
Though this
the
guy
kind.
thinks if lizards live long enough, they could be the size of Texas. So I don't know what the fuck he's going on about.
Percentage of oxygen in the air. Obviously, there were gigantic insects on this planet. I mean, 52-inch dragonfly fossils have been found. If you want to talk about the fossil record, they talk about 2-foot grasshoppers that they couldn't survive. They couldn't breathe today because they breathe through spiracles in their skin. They don't have a lung system like we do.
Just filling the air.
So we could talk about fossils if you'd like. I have quite a large collection of fossils. I think all the fossils indicate something was very different on this planet.
Okay, we're approaching 6 o'clock, which is when I gotta take care of some stuff. In addition, I'm tired of listening to Kent Hovind's voice. I think we've gotten out about as much out of this as we were going to. I would have liked to have shown the totality of this debate going off the rails because it already has. It's not like it's going to get that much more wacky, but it keeps going for a long time, and I wanted to inflict pain upon myself and you. You should suffer with me. So, but I don't think we'll get through the. I don't think we're gonna get to the rest of this. I don't really want to come back to this. I was gonna ask in the chat what people think. We're gonna move on. I think we got a good idea here. It was good to go over. I think there was some really interesting stuff that came up here. Maybe we will. I think we still will go over that video I was talking about before. I'll figure out how to link those things in the description of this video as I was talking about. But ideally, to get into some debates myself, maybe I should start poking around in the different communities to see about how to do that. I don't know how. It's one of those, like, especially being on coming from, the outside of all this, coming from what is generally the audience and not thinking about it too much. It always feels like, oh, it's like going on a TV show. You can't just like ask to get on there. But I guess I have to keep in mind that some of these channels, or they don't. It's not like they're getting inundated with requests. Someone requesting to come on might be, in a small list of people asking to come on. So maybe I can start asking around, see if I can get in on that. Thanks for sticking around, those of you who did. I know we had a lot of problems today. I think there was some stuff that still got missed in switching back. It's connecting OBS to my mic again. I don't know why it disconnected in the first place. In fact, something kind of interesting about that is that I first thought, oh, maybe it was because my computer restarted, and when OBS restarted, I had that issue. But then it restarted again when the power went out, and I didn't have that problem again. So who the hell knows? Hopefully we didn't miss too much from that. And then, of course, the power going out. It was a rough stream, but kind of a long one. I'm glad we went longer this time. Glad you all stuck around. Very much appreciate it. And I'm gonna get on with my day from here on.